Chapter 4664. Kong Ming Ming curled his lips resentfully. Feeling Su Lingchong's unkind gaze behind him, he shivered and quickly turned his head to leave. His superiors spent so much effort to get him super equipment, such as laser cannons and intelligent armor, not to let him come here to pick up girls. Since he couldn't pick up any beauties, he'd better hurry to collect the treasures of heaven and earth. Time was limited, and he couldn't dawdle for too long. If Lin Yi won first place this time, his superiors might punish him. After getting rid of the annoying fly, Kong Ming Ming, Hui Yudi was obviously relieved, but then Lin Yi said in front of her, "Then I'm leaving. Don't follow me if there's nothing else, or I'll think you're up to no good." "Wait a minute," Hui Yudi shouted anxiously. "What else do you want?" Lin Yi was really impatient this time. He really couldn't understand why this woman was sticking to him. He looked at her angrily and said, "I don't have time to talk to you now. See you later." After that, Lin Yi stepped forward directly. His intuition told him that he would definitely be in trouble if this woman stuck to him. He couldn't make any mistakes in this West Island trial test, and he didn't have time to waste with her. "You have the constitution of 5 elements?" Hui Yudi suddenly asked at this time. "What?" Lin Yi stopped in his tracks in shock, subconsciously looking around to make sure that no one was paying attention to them. He then turned his attention back to Hui Yudi, re-evaluating her. This woman from the East Continent was able to see through his spirit root's attribute with just one look. Could it be that she had some sort of golden finger in this area? Although it was not a big deal to be known by others, at least it wouldn't be a substantial threat, it was still a surprise. After all, this could only be tested with very professional props. Lin Yi had never heard of such a talent that could be known at a glance before. Although he was shocked in his heart, Lin Yi's face was still calm, and he said with an unfathomable expression, "What constitution of 5 elements? What's that?" A full attribute spirit root is also known as a constitution of the 5 elements. Hui Yudi stared fixedly at Lin Yi. It seemed that she had already confirmed this matter. Common? Lin Yi couldn't help but curl his lips. He knew that he couldn't hide this matter from the other party. He looked Hui Yudi up and down and said, "I think only the secular world calls her that. No one on Heaven Stage Island calls her a 5 elements physique." "All right, that's how it's called in the secular world." Hui Yudi nodded in agreement. "You know about the secular world?" Lin Yi was surprised to hear this. His words were just a subconscious test. He did not expect to get such a shocking result. This chick from the East Continent was getting weirder and weirder. She inexplicably came up to him and pestered him. She was also able to point out his 5 elements physique with a single sentence. She even knew that this was what the secular world called it. There were so many suspicious points mixed together. Anyone would find it strange. Lin Yi couldn't help but wonder if this woman was sent by some organization to get close to him. "I know." Hui Yudi nodded again, as if it was a matter of course. Lin Yi's eyes were still full of suspicion. There were many people on Heaven Stage Island who knew about the secular world. However, there shouldn't be many who knew about the 5 elements physique. He immediately said in a deep voice, "Then you don't know what Ultraman is? What is Kaizi? Who are you?" "I really don't know. I only heard about the secular world from others. She told me that you have a 5 elements physique. That's why I specifically asked you to confirm it." Hui Yudi's words were shocking. "She? Who is she?" Lin Yi was suddenly shocked. This matter was even more shocking than the fact that she had a golden finger that could see through the attribute of the spirit root. From what this chick said, she actually knew someone who was familiar with him. "I don't know her specific identity. She is just a woman who was teleported from the secular world to the East Continent." Hui Yudi blinked and said, whether she was telling the truth or hiding something, it was unknown. "What?" Hearing this, even the usually calm Lin Yi couldn't help but change his expression. There were only a few people who were teleported from the secular world to Heaven Stage Island. Although there were many enemies and unrelated outsiders, since the other party was a woman, the range of targets was very small. The range of targets was already very small. Perhaps it was those who had a close relationship with him. For women to go from the secular world to Heaven Stage Island, the best place to go was the West Island, followed by the North Island and the Middle Island. And if he had to find the worst place, it would be the chaotic South Continent and the powerful and mysterious East Continent. Wang Xinyan was purely lucky to have met the Eastern Sea Divine Nun, which was why her journey was smooth sailing. Otherwise, who knew how miserable her life would be if she entered that ruthless school? Thinking about this, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little nervous. This woman from the secular world was very likely to be his confidant. It was very likely that she was his confidant. Otherwise, she wouldn't have mentioned him, let alone the 5 Elements Constitution. Lin Yi took a deep breath to calm himself down. What's her name? I don't know. I only know that after she was teleported to the East Continent, she was lucky enough to be accepted by Dawn Pride Girls Academy. But things didn't go so well after that. Hui Yudi said, looking at Lin Yi's changing expression. How so? Lin Yi's heart tightened. Not long after, she offended someone she shouldn't have. She was the granddaughter of one of the vice headmasters of our Morning Pride Academy. As a result, she was forcefully charged with a crime and thrown into the dungeon. After being tortured, she spilled everything she could and couldn't say. That's how I found out about you, Hui Yudi said honestly. What? Lin Yi was startled once more. He'd guessed that Dongzhou was a dangerous place, even after entering the academy. Then where's she? What does she look like? How would I know? I didn't pay attention to her at first, and after that, she was beaten beyond recognition. Of course I wouldn't know. Hui Yudi shook her head. That. Lin Yi panicked. If this woman was an outsider who had nothing to do with him, it wouldn't be a big deal. But the problem was that she might be his confidant. How could Lin Yi remain calm after hearing this? Fortunately, he didn't bring the spirit bird this time. Otherwise, he might have flown from the West Island to the East Continent. Chapter 4665. Lin Yi was silent for a moment. Suddenly, he looked up at Hui Yudi with an unfriendly expression and said in a cold tone, So, you also participated in the torture, right? No. Hui Yudi shook her head. No, how did you know? Lin Yi's eyes sharpened and he asked. I overheard it when I secretly let her go. She looked so pitiful to me, but I haven't seen her since. Hui Yudi pursed her lips and said, Phew. Hearing this, Lin Yi let out a long sigh of relief. Originally, he felt that this girl was inexplicable and even a little vigilant, but now his impression of her became much better, and his eyes became much kinder. No matter who the woman in the secular world was, whether it was his confidant Shunxi or Rock Candy, Song Lingrui, Tian Dai, or even the highest elder of Snow Valley, Lin didn't want anything to happen to them, because each of them had a direct or indirect relationship with him. What's more, Hui Yudi had saved this woman's life. Just because of this kindness, Lin Yi wouldn't ignore her like before. No matter who this woman was, Lin Yi felt that he should be indebted to her. Although he said that, Lin Yi was secretly grateful, but at the same time, he was shocked. That woman offended the deputy dean's granddaughter, and as a result, she was locked up and tortured unscrupulously. It could be seen how dangerous the environment of East Continent College was. Hui Yudi dared to release this woman without permission. Wasn't that making an enemy of the deputy dean's granddaughter? Didn't the deputy dean's granddaughter make trouble for you after you secretly released her? Lin Yi looked her up and down and said, At the beginning, he had guessed that this girl's identity might not be simple. Otherwise, she wouldn't be qualified to follow him to West Island, and she wouldn't dare to oppose the deputy dean's granddaughter. First, she didn't see me release her with her own eyes. Second, I am Lu Ziyu's direct disciple. Hui Yudi said lightly. No wonder. Lin Yi suddenly came to a realization. Of these 2 reasons, the latter was the key. Since the other party could casually pin a crime on someone, it didn't matter whether he saw it or not. And the Lu Ziyu that the other party was talking about was the deputy dean who was representing Morning Pride Academy on this diplomatic mission to the West Island. The Heavenly Island had always adhered to the ancient customs. The status and importance of a direct disciple was not the slightest bit inferior to those descendants who were related by blood. In fact, it was often even more so. This was because not all of his descendants would be able to achieve greatness, and there were even fewer who could truly inherit his legacy. However, personal disciples were different. They were existences that were destined to inherit his legacy. They were the inheritors that the big shots had spent countless efforts and energy on. This kind of inheritance relationship was even above blood relations. The divine nun of the East Sea and Wang Xinyan were a ready-made example. As Lu Ziyu's personal disciple, it was normal for Hui Yudi to not be afraid of the vice headmaster's granddaughter. After all, if Lu Ziyu's status was higher than the vice headmaster's, the latter would have to curry favor with her instead. Then why are you looking for me? Linny asked. He'd asked this question 3 times already, and this was the only time he'd asked it in the friendliest tone. If it wasn't something too troublesome, he wouldn't mind. If it wasn't something too troublesome, he would really be willing to help the other party. My current strength is at the nascent soul great perfection. I'm only 1 step away from the final breakthrough. Hui Yudi said with a serious face. And then, Linny nodded. The other party did not restrain her aura. He had already noticed this a long time ago, but he did not particularly care about it. The strength of the nascent soul great perfection was considered top-notch among the people in this trial. But Lin Yi himself was a freak who could even kill a profound, ascending stage expert in 1 move. Of course, he did not feel that it was a big deal. I've been stuck in this realm for more than 10 years, Hui Yudi said pitifully. More than 10 years? Lin Yi looked at her noncommittally. At the nascent soul stage, it would take at least a few decades or even 100 years for a normal person to break through. This was nothing to be pitiful about, right? However, from this point, it could be seen that the other party's aptitude was indeed extraordinary. No wonder she could become the vice dean's direct disciple. If it was an ordinary cultivator who had been stuck at the nascent soul great perfection for more than 10 years, it would not be called a bottleneck at all. At most, it would be a warm-up. Yes, so senior brother Lin, can you help me? Hui Yudi's eyes were watery as she looked at Lin Yi. She couldn't help but feel sorry for him. If Kong Xiaoming was in Lin Yi's place, he'd probably kneel down without a second thought. He'd do whatever she asked him to do without a second thought. However, Lin Yi's reaction was completely different from what he had imagined. He almost burst out laughing. He coughed a few times and said, Ahem, since you've been stuck for more than 10 years, you must be older than me, so you don't have to call me senior brother. It's okay, I'm mentally young. I've always been cultivating and rarely come into contact with the outside world. Hui Yudi shook her head indifferently. It seemed that she really didn't think there was anything wrong with it. Lin Yi couldn't help but look sideways. In this short period of time, he had some understanding of the other party, but he was not completely sure. He didn't know whether the other party pretended to be so innocent in order to deliberately confuse him or whether she really didn't have any bad intentions. Lin Yi thought that he had a good eye for people, but in the face of this Hui Yudi who suddenly appeared, he was really a little uncertain. If all this was purely an act, then her acting skills were too good. But if the other party was so simple and natural, it didn't seem to be completely so. Could it be that she was both? Whatever you want. My patience is limited. Don't beat around the bush anymore. What do you want me to do? Lin Yi simply asked straightforwardly. Even if he knew that the other party might have saved his confidant, Lin Yi really had no time to waste at the moment. If he wanted to get the first place in this West Island trial, he must race against time. Well, I heard Master mention that in the ruins of the ancient battlefield in West Island, there seems to be a place where the thunder Xian vine grows. Hui Yudi no longer hid, and her eyes were shining. Thunder Xian vine? What's that? Lin Yi was stunned when he heard this. He couldn't help but frown a little. The name sounded a little familiar. Hui Yudi couldn't help but look at Lin Yi. It seemed that he didn't even know this kind of thing. She was stunned for a moment, and then said, that's the main material for refining the Thunder Xian pill. Thunder Xian pill? Yes. Lin Yi finally remembered that the Thunder Xian pill was a necessary pill to promote to the profound ascension stage. Although he was now at the peak of the early stage of Yuanying stage, and it seemed that there was still a long time before he reached the profound ascension stage. But with the promotion speed of his strongest Yuanying stage, this time was much shorter than ordinary people. Especially with a fortuitous encounter like the 5 Poison Swamp, he might reach it in the blink of an eye. Chapter 4666. In the foundation establishment stage, there was the foundation establishment pill, then the gold core pill, and the soul gathering pill. However, although the Thunder Shin pill was a necessary pill to break through to the profound ascension stage, its nature was completely different from the first three pills. There was no other reason. The difference between the profound ascension stage and the nascent soul stage was like heaven and earth. Regardless of whether it was the original infant stage or the previous stage, most people had developed the habit of taking pills to break through. In fact, this concept had already been deeply ingrained in their hearts. But in reality, as long as one had enough talent and perseverance, every realm could be broken through naturally. In principle, there was no need for any medicinal pills. But the profound ascension stage was different. As mentioned before, in order to advance to the profound ascension stage, one must have more than 2 types of spirit root attributes, and need to fuse 2 types of true chi to advance to the next level. Although this step was extremely difficult, it was the same as the previous stages and did not require any pills. When 2 types of spiritual roots weave together, they could trigger a lightning tribulation. Thunder retribution was a kind of heavenly punishment. It was the ruthless obliteration of the heavens to those who defy the heavens. In other words, before the profound ascension stage, even if one reached the nascent soul stage, they could only be regarded as powerful, but not heaven-defying. After all, he hadn't even experienced heavenly punishment. How could he say that he was heaven-defying? Since it was a god's punishment, it was no small matter. Cultivators at the peak of the original level would not be able to withstand it. No matter how powerful the super geniuses were, they would need to take a life-saving elixir if they wanted to survive the lightning tribulation. And that was the profound thunder elixir. It could be said that having a Thunder Shin core was equivalent to having a ticket to the profound ascension stage. This did not mean that you could directly open the door, but at least you could guarantee that when you tried to open the door, you would not be killed by the guards. Thinking of this, Lenny couldn't help but be moved. If the other party said something else, he might not be interested. However, this Thunder Shin Rot-Tan happened to be what he needed. In fact, even if he didn't look for it this time, he would find a way to get it in the near future. He might as well take this opportunity to push the boat along with the current. After all, the rarity of the Thunder Shin Rot-Tan was no less than that of the nascent ginseng. It was not easy for Lin Yi to inquire about any valuable information by himself, let alone to really obtain it. That's good. How do we split it after we find it? Lin Yi immediately said straightforwardly. Determining the distribution of benefits was the most crucial prerequisite for cooperation. If they couldn't even reach an agreement on this point, then there was no need to continue talking. It was purely a waste of time. 3-7. What Yudi blurted out without hesitation. It seemed that she had already thought about it. You take 30 and I take 70? Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. Impossible. Yudi immediately choked. Looking at Lin Yi's matter-of-fact expression, she could only shake her head in annoyance. You clearly know. Forget it. Without saying another word, Lin Yi turned around and left. It was as if the Thunder Shin Rot-Tan was not essential to him. He did not want it all. It was simply wishful thinking to use this little temptation to make him fall into a dilemma. Big brother Lin. Yudi pursed her lips and looked at Lin Yi with watery eyes. Her tone and demeanor were actually exactly the same as Han Jingjing's. It was obvious that she had deliberately observed and imitated them. After all, for a beauty like her, no man could resist her coquettish attacks, unless the other party was not a man. At this time, if it was any other man, they would have long been head over heels in love. Not to mention 30 or 70, even if they were to work hard for her, they would not hesitate to nod and agree. Unfortunately, Lin Yi was an exception. Don't waste your effort. I don't fall for it. Lin Yi looked at her coldly. His gaze clearly contained some impatience, and even a hint of warning. This caused Yudi to be startled and subconsciously covered her mouth. Didn't Master say that this move would work 100% of the time when dealing with men? Why didn't it work? Huiyuti could not help but feel a little nervous in her heart. She did not expect that Lin Yi was only putting on a stern face at this moment. In fact, there was a slight palpitation in his heart for no reason. However, he concealed it very well, so others could not see it. At the end of the day, Huiyuti's master was not wrong. A beauty's coquettish attacks were effective on any man, especially when used by an absolute beauty like her. At this moment, separated by a veil, only a pair of bright and delicate eyes clearly made Lin Yi feel a moving charm. It was only because he had a firm will and was long used to beauties like Han Jingjing. This woman was definitely a beauty at the level of calamity. Lin Yi secretly raised his guard. If the other party took off her veil at this moment, he really did not dare to say that he would definitely be able to hold on. Although he would not completely lose his mind, once he felt a sense of pity, he might subconsciously give in to the other party. All right then, in order to show my sincerity, I will take a step back. 40 to 60. Seeing that Lin Yi still did not move, Huiyuti could only choose to give in. In her heart, she was speechless. Could it be that what Kong Ming said before was true? Was this guy really a eunuch? Otherwise, why would her coquettish attacks have no effect at all? Bye-bye. The corner of Lin Yi's mouth twitched, as if he had completely lost his patience. He immediately quickened his pace to shake off the other party. What do you mean? Huiyuti saw this and was immediately shocked. She hurriedly chased after him and asked, "It means to say goodbye. If this is your so-called sincerity, then we have nothing to talk about," Lin Yi said without turning his head. Hearing this, Huiyuti stopped in her tracks. Her expression fluctuated as she looked at Lin Yi's back. She could not help but feel a sense of helplessness in her heart. Why is this guy so stubborn? 50 to 50. This is already a sky-high price. It is also my bottom line. I cannot go any higher. Huiyuti clenched her teeth and said. However, her eyes were filled with the determination to bargain with a small peddler. She was currently at a bottleneck and urgently needed the Thunder Xian pill. If she missed this opportunity, she did not know where she would have to go next time to get the Thunder Xian vine. If she was stuck at a bottleneck for too long, it would drag a genius into a waste. She cannot afford to delay it. Let's go with what you said before. Otherwise, there's no need to talk. Lin Yi stopped in his tracks and said. At the same time, the corner of his mouth slightly hooked up. When he said 3 to 7, it naturally had to be reversed. The other party would take 3, and he would take 7. Although his impression of this little girl had improved a lot, this was a different matter. In this kind of matter, Lin Yi would not foolishly give in. After all, the other party was just a stranger that he had never met. Lin Yi's generosity had always been given to friends and people close to him. He would never give alms to strangers, even if the other party was a peerless beauty. Chapter 46-67. Forget it if we can't reach an agreement. Lin Yi shook his head and continued to walk forward. Although he said so, he was very sure in his heart that this girl would definitely take the bait. The reason why he dared to extort her so openly was that Lin Yi was sure that Huiyuti would take the bait. It was true that only the other party knew the information, but Lin Yi was 100% sure that the process of getting the Thunder Xianrot Tan would be very difficult, and he must help her. Otherwise, why didn't she do it alone? Even if the other party let go of the secular woman whose identity he didn't know, Lin Yi didn't think that Huiyuti would be so kind. The Thunder Xianrot Tan was an extremely rare treasure of heaven and earth. She would share it with others for no reason. Was she so free? Since the other party deliberately found Lin Yi, it meant that she needed to rely on him. Therefore, Lin Yi wasn't afraid to scare her away at all. Besides, the other party's need for the Thunder Xianrot Tan was far more urgent than his. If he didn't take advantage of this ready-made opportunity, Lin Yi would feel sorry for himself. As expected, Huiyuti stared blankly for a long time. Finally, she squeezed out 2 words from between her teeth. Deal. Very well. Then it's a happy decision. Lin Yi smiled brightly, but facing this so-called happy way of sharing, Huiyuti's expression was so depressed that she was about to cry. She even couldn't help but wonder if she had found the wrong person to cooperate with Lin Yi this time. As soon as the two of them reached an agreement, three people, two men and a woman, suddenly came not far behind them. They were talking and laughing as they walked, and they didn't look as serious and cautious as the others. It seemed that the nature of this trial in West Island was like a sightseeing tour for them. There was no difficulty at all. "Hey, isn't this senior sister Hua? Why didn't you wait for us?" The one who spoke was the woman. After seeing Hui Yudi from a distance, she smiled and took the lead to walk over. At the same time, the other two men also smiled and followed them. It seemed that they were Hui Yudi's acquaintances. However, after seeing these three people, Hui Yudi's face changed, but was not easy to be noticed by others because of the veil. Then her eyes became indifferent again. The relationship between this chick and the three people behind her doesn't seem to be harmonious. Lin Yi saw Hui Yudi's reaction and turned around to size up the three people behind him. The woman in the lead was wearing a tight-fitting cyan soft armor, which vividly displayed her exquisite and well-proportioned figure, which was quite tempting. Although her face was not as stunning as Shangwan Laner and the others, she was still a rare beauty. However, in Lin Yi's eyes, she was inferior. No matter how he looked at it, Lin Yi felt that the other party had a frivolous and overbearing aura that he couldn't get rid of. It affected his entire temperament and made him feel very awkward. Therefore, although he looked beautiful, he didn't feel the slightest bit of admiration or amazement. As for the two men who came with the woman, they were both handsome young men with bright and cheerful appearances. They should be the type that was popular with girls. Moreover, looking at the way they walked and their expressions, he knew that they were definitely the type that felt good about themselves. Perhaps they had the so-called halo of a genius on their heads. It was a pity that Lin Yi only took a glance at them and didn't care about them. For men, the influence of appearance on their image was far less than the unique aura that was formed unconsciously. According to Lin Yi's experience, any man who had achievements in a certain area would definitely form a unique aura. The aura of these two men was at most a little better than that of ordinary people. It was far from leaving a deep impression. In Lin Yi's opinion, they weren't even as good as the Ragged King. "So, what's junior sister Jelly?" Hui Yudi nodded indifferently. Then, she changed the topic. "However, why should I wait for you?" The woman called Jelly's expression changed when she heard this. Her cheeks unnaturally hesitated for a moment. She put away her fake smile and looked coldly at Hui Yudi. "What? It seems that senior sister Hua doesn't welcome me? Could it be that you've turned a deaf ear to the dean's words? Before we set off, she specifically told us to work together. Senior sister Hua, you don't even care about the dean because of your identity, do you?" Hui Yudi squinted her eyes slightly, and the surrounding atmosphere suddenly became cold. Lin Yi could see that this girl really didn't get along with Jelly. Her impatience was obvious. "Haha, junior sister Yudi and junior sister Jelly, you don't have to be so mean to each other. You two are known as the Morning Pride twins. In a place like West Island, you should work together." Seeing this, the taller man next to them quickly smoothed things over. "Right, we're all from East Continent. It's the right thing to work together. We can't be laughed at by outsiders, which will damage the image of our East Continent college." Another man echoed. While the two were talking, their eyes fell on Lin Yi. Although they didn't say anything directly, the arrogance in their bones and the contempt from the bottom of their hearts were really infuriating. However, Lin Yi didn't bother to pay attention to them. Hearing what the two said, Hui Yudi couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. She looked at them and didn't say anything. No one knew what she was thinking. "Yeah, senior sister Hua, the two senior brothers are right. You can't ruin the image of our Morning Pride Academy." Jelly's face showed the same kind of smile again. She looked at Lin Yi up and down maliciously. She curled her lips and said, "Senior sister Hua, aren't you always proud and arrogant and claim to be an untouchable ice lotus? You've only left East Continent for a few days. How come you've hooked up with a wild man? Even if you're interested, you should at least pay attention to the image of our college, right? Don't talk nonsense." Hui Yudi was so angry that her pretty face turned red. She looked at Lin Yi awkwardly, turned her head and scolded coldly. "He's just a teammate I found. Junior sister Jelly, If you say such nonsense again, don't blame me for not considering our relationship as fellow disciples." Jelly frowned and was about to continue mocking, but the tall man standing next to her spoke first. "Teammate? Ha, junior sister Yudi. Where did you find such a rustic teammate? Is he a native of West Island? I heard that he's always at home serving tea and taking care of children all year round. This is the first time I've seen such a person." Chapter 4668. Anyone could see the greed in his eyes. From the moment he saw Lin Yi talking to Huiyudi, he already disliked Lin Yi. This was the perfect opportunity to make things difficult for him. Lin Yi frowned slightly when he heard this. Other than Huiyudi, these people were insignificant in his eyes. He was too lazy to pay attention to them. He didn't even bother to look at them. However, if they didn't have eyes and provoked him, then there was nothing much to say. "All right, native teammate, there's nothing for you to do here. You can leave." The tall man directly waved his hand to signal the guest to leave. Other than him, no other man should even think about getting close to Huiyudi. He turned his head to look at Huiyudi. He wouldn't get angry because of a few words from this kind of jumping clown. He would either directly ignore it or directly crush it to death. The key was to see what this little girl was going to choose. Huiyudi frowned. Finally, she gritted her teeth and said to Lin Yi, "Let's go." "Oh." Lin Yi nodded indifferently. These people didn't enter his eyes. Moreover, this was their internal dispute. Lin Yi had no interest in getting involved at all. TSK, senior sister Hua. What do you want me to say? You actually didn't hesitate to fall out with us for a wild man. People said that you're as pure as ice and as clean as jade. Bah, it turns out that you're just a bastard. You really don't even want your face. Carrie immediately mocked and ridiculed mercilessly. "What did you say?" Huiyudi suddenly turned around and glared at her. Even Lin Yi couldn't bear to listen to this kind of filthy words, let alone a girl like her who valued her reputation and integrity. "You know what I'm saying. Since you can do this kind of stupid thing, why can't I say it?" I say, do you want to keep it for yourself? You can't be naive enough to think that you can get what we're looking for by pulling in such a wild man, right? You're simply daydreaming." Carrie continued to taunt and ridicule. When Lin Yi heard this, his heart moved slightly. Listening to these words, could it be that these people also came for the Thundershian vine? Originally, if it was someone unrelated to him, then he really couldn't be bothered to deal with it. But if it was a competitor, furthermore, he was so arrogant that it would be inexcusable if he didn't do something about it. Huiyudi was about to retort, but Carrie didn't give her a chance. She turned to look at Lin Yi and sneered, "Country bumpkin. I'll give you a piece of advice out of goodwill. This senior marshal brother in Zhongyuan is senior marshal sister was suitor. Not only is he very strong, but he also has a bad temper. You should be careful. Don't die." As Carrie spoke, the tall man called Rin Zhongyuan cooperated with her and sneered coldly. The gaze he looked at Lin Yi shockingly carried a bit of killing intent. It seemed that if he didn't cooperate, this guy really intended to do something. Unfortunately, this person had obviously found the wrong target. Lin Yi's gaze was much colder and sharper than his. When their gazes met, it was Rin Zhongyuan who subconsciously took a step back. This scene really shocked the others. Rin Zhongyuan was a genius disciple of the East Continent Institute, and in everyone's eyes, Lin Yi was nothing more than a country bumpkin. There was absolutely no comparison between them. Who would have thought that Rin Zhongyuan, the genius of the East Continent, would be scared off by a country bumpkin? Having accidentally made a fool of himself, Rin Zhongyuan immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. At this moment, Lin Yi's cold gaze still fell on his face. He indifferently spat out a sentence. "Trash, you better not waste my time. Otherwise, I'll kill you." "What? You actually dare to call me trash? You even said you want to kill me? You're just a country bumpkin. How dare you?" Rin Zhongyuan immediately erupted. The powerful aura of a nascent soul-perfected stage expert instantly poured out without reservation. He was originally an extremely arrogant person. Moreover, right now in front of his sweetheart, Huiyudi, how could he possibly admit defeat? The powerful aura caused the surrounding sand and stones to fly, and the wind to howl. It was a terrifying scene filled with murderous intent. However, he stood still in the middle of it. He didn't seem to emit any powerful aura, but the surrounding did not affect him at all. He didn't even blink. Huiyuti was shocked. She didn't know that he had the powerful strength to fight against enemies of a higher level. Killing a profound ascending stage expert was like playing a game. She only knew that Lin Yi's current strength was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. In front of a person like Ren Zhongyuan, it could be said that he was too weak to withstand a single blow. Senior brother Ren, stop. If that's the case, let's go together. This senior brother Lin's identity is not trivial. You can't be rude to him. Huiyuti hurriedly stood in front of Lin Yi. Once the two sides clashed, in her opinion, Lin Yi would definitely die. In that case, the previous agreement would be in vain. What? You said that this country bumpkin's background is not small? He's just a country bumpkin. What background can he have? Jilly curled her lips disapprovingly. His name is Lin Yi. He's a teammate arranged by my master. His master is an old friend of my master in the North Island, Shanghai Tianhua. Huiyuti clenched her teeth and said. Lin Yi glanced at Huiyuti in surprise. He estimated that she just thought of a lie in a moment of inspiration. However, in Lin Yi's opinion, it was half true and half false. Her brain turned quite fast. What? Shanghai Tianhua. Whether it was Jieli, Ren Zhongyuan, or the other man, they couldn't help but change their expressions when they heard Huiyuti's words. Obviously, they had all heard of this top boss of the North Island. However, after Jieli recovered from her shock, she obviously still didn't quite believe it. Him? He's a disciple of Shanghai Tianhua? Why haven't I heard of him? Didn't you see that he sat with Shangwan Laner at the birthday banquet before? Before entering the teleportation portal just now, Shangwan Laner was still following him. Think about it yourself. If he wasn't the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua, would the little princess of the North Island have such a close relationship with him? Huiyuti said seriously. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh inwardly when he heard that. Although it was a cover, it was 90% true. At least it was true that he had been with Shangwan Lana all this time. He didn't expect this girl to be such a master of lying. She was so good at it, and no one could see through her lies at all. Sure enough, after hearing Huiyuti's words, Ren Zhongyuan and the others had already remembered the scene that they had accidentally glimpsed before. It seemed that Shangwan Laner was beside the person in front of them. In that case, this guy was really a disciple of Shanghai Tianhua. They were the genius disciples of East State College. It was understandable for them to put on a high and mighty attitude when they came out to West Island. After all, the standard of East State was much higher than that of other Heaven Stage islands. However, if the other party was the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua, then they were in the wrong place. Chapter 4669. That was because Shangwan Tianhua was one of the top powerhouses of the 5 heaven-ranked islands. Even their backers would have to clasp their hands in greeting when they saw him, to say nothing of juniors like them. All right, for the sake of Deputy Island Master Shangwan, I'll bring you along to reap some benefits. Ren Zhongyuan snorted coldly and had to stop bitterly. Deputy Island Master Shangwan? This time, it was Lin Yi who was a little stunned. He had been on Heaven Stage Island for so long and had some interactions with Shanghai Tianhua, but he had never heard that this person was actually the Deputy Island Master of the North Island. All along, the North Island had always emphasized the 3 pavilions. From top to bottom, everyone would say that it was the 3 pavilions of the North Island. Under this background, even the Island Master was extremely mysterious, let alone the Deputy Island Master. Everyone knew that Shanghai Tianhua was the Pavilion Master of Soaring Pavilion, but not many people knew about his identity as the Deputy Island Master of the North Island. At least, newcomers like Lin Yi who were inexperienced had never heard of it. Seeing how Ren Zhongyuan and the others looked at him as if they were giving him charity, Lin Yi didn't have the hostility he had before. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, especially Huiyuti's pleading eyes, Lin Yi's lips curled up slightly, and he nodded noncommittally. All right, thanks for the trouble. Although these people were not worth mentioning, if it was not necessary, Lin Yi did not want to have a conflict with the people of the East Continent for the time being. After all, these people had deep backgrounds in various academies. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Lin Yi did not want to make enemies with them. Seeing that Lin Yi was so cooperative, Huiyuti finally breathed a sigh of relief. From her previous contact, she had already seen that Lin Yi had an indescribable arrogance. Although it was not obvious on the surface, in fact, it was everywhere. She was really afraid that if Lin Yi had a conflict with these people, it would really be out of control. Fortunately, Lin Yi might be arrogant, but he wasn't completely clueless. At least he knew when to yield and when to stand tall. He was not a brainless person. Junior apprentice Sister Yudai, let's go. Ren Zhongyuan immediately led the way forward. At the same time, he didn't forget to glance back at Lin Yi. I hope you won't be a burden to us. Otherwise, even if you're Vice Island Master Shangwan's personal disciple, it'll be useless. If you die in the trial due to your lack of strength, no one will be able to say anything. Carrie and the other man followed behind her. She also sized up Lin Yi with a profound gaze. With a mocking expression, she said, "Hee, no wonder senior sister would took a fancy to you. So you have such a powerful backer. But still, be careful, don't die." Lin Yi shrugged his shoulders indifferently. It seemed that these guys really treated him as a punching bag. Did they really think that he was a pushover? It was fine if nothing happened along the way. Otherwise, he might end up kicking an iron plate. Don't take it to heart. They took their anger out on you because of me. I'm sorry. Huiyuti deliberately walked at the back with Lin Yi and apologized in a low voice. Oh, it doesn't matter to me. Lin Yi replied with a faint smile. And that's good. Seeing that Lin Yi's calm appearance didn't seem to be fake, Huiyuti's eyes couldn't help but show some appreciation. A look of admiration appeared in Huiyuti's eyes. Although her strength was far from Ren Zhongyuan's and the others, it was rare to see such an indifferent attitude. Compared to those people, it was obvious who was superior. Forgive me for asking, but are you sure there's no problem with moving with the three of them? Lin Yi suddenly asked. His goal with Huiyuti was the Thunder Xianrat-tan. Now, it was obvious that he had disrupted Huiyuti's original plan and rhythm. If he couldn't obtain the Thunder Xianrat-tan like this, he didn't want to waste time with these people. Huiyuti was also a little hesitant. She said with some hesitation, one more person means one more strength. Moving with them can be said to have advantages and disadvantages. Let's take it one step at a time. If it doesn't work, we'll think of another way. Okay, if that's what you're saying, then I have no objections. Lin Yi nodded. It was obvious that Huiyuti didn't want to say too much. Her words were ambiguous, and he didn't know what she meant. He then asked, "Oh, by the way, who are they specifically?" Although he could infer some identity information from just a few words, it was, after all, not complete. Lin Yi felt that it was necessary to first find out the other party's background. When there was a conflict, it would be convenient for him to weigh the pros and cons and not have too many misgivings. The man in the front is called Ren Zhongyuan. You also heard this. He is a disciple of East Continent's Soaring Cloud Academy. He doesn't have any background in Soaring Cloud Academy, but he is the son of our academy's Grand Chancellor. Speaking of this person, Huiyuti's eyes clearly showed a bit of disgust. It could be seen that this suitor was really not in her favor. Grand Chancellor? Lin Yi was stunned. He had heard of positions like Grand Chancellor. For example, his old rival Nantian Aurora was the Grand Chancellor of Middle Island's Cultivator Academy. However, this was the first time he had heard of Grand Chancellor. Yes, this is a special position of East Continent's Academy. In terms of authority, it is basically equal to that of the Vice Dean. The two positions both overlap and oppose each other. To a certain extent, the control of the Academy is even stronger than that of the Vice Dean, because all the Grand Chancellors and students are under the jurisdiction of the Grand Chancellor. Everything is decided by the Grand Chancellor. Huiyuti explained. I see. Lin Yi roughly understood the meaning of this position. It was mostly because East Continent's Academy was too powerful so it was specially set up to balance the power of the academy, so that the vice dean could not cover the sky with one hand. After all, the dean of each academy would not have the mood to personally manage the internal affairs of the academy. The other man is called Xiaotian. He is also a disciple of Soaring Cloud Academy. His uncle is a vice dean of Soaring Cloud Academy. Speaking of this, Huiyuti suddenly paused. She blushed and said in a mosquito-like voice, "He is Jelly's cultivation partner, so he often comes to our academy with Renjongyan." Cultivation partner? Lenny could not help but look at the two of them strangely. Sure enough, Xiaotian's hand was restlessly groping Jelly's body. He dared to do such a thing in front of them. He was really a weirdo. However, this brat might not necessarily be uninterested in Huiyuti. Although his reaction was not as big as Renjong Yuan's, his gaze toward Huiyuti was clearly filled with lust. Eating from the bowl and looking at the pot, this was a common problem of young masters. As for junior sister Jelly, her full name is Yao Jelly. She is the granddaughter of our Morning Pride Academy's vice dean. Huiyuti suddenly looked at Lin Yi with a deep meaning, then continued to say, "The secular world girl that I told you about before only ended up like this because she offended her." Chapter 4670. No wonder I don't like her. Lin Yi's eyes turned cold. No matter who the secular world girl was, no matter if she was his confidant or not, he had already blacklisted Yao Jelly. Although he didn't plan to deal with her for now, if there was a chance, Lin Yi didn't mind pushing the boat along. Huiyuti's gaze towards Yao Jelly from behind was not very friendly either. Both of them had the vice headmaster of Morning Pride Academy behind them, and their competitive relationship was fierce, so they had never been on good terms. Especially after the secular world girl incident, the two of them almost fell out, and there were already signs of them breaking up in public. Otherwise, as fellow disciples of Morning Pride Academy, their relationship wouldn't be so bad. "Junior sister Yuti, when did you meet him? How come I didn't know?" At this time, Rin Zhongyan, who was walking in front, suddenly took a few steps back and came over. He was obviously jealous of Lin Yi and Huiyuti's conversation. "My master and his master are old friends. Is it strange that we know each other?" Huiyuti replied with a cold face. But I've never heard you mention it before. Why did you suddenly come out this time?" Rin Zhong Yuan still didn't give up. "Senior brother Ren, there are many things you don't know about me." Huiyuti's tone was stiff, and she was clearly a little impatient with this guy, almost falling out with him. "Haha, you're right. That's why I want to know more about you, junior sister Yuti." Rin Zhong Yuan, on the other hand, didn't seem to be aware of it at all. He continued to smile as he glanced at Lin Yi discreetly. As long as he didn't let the two of them whisper to each other, he'd have achieved his goal. Huiyuti looked at him and didn't reply, but Rin Zhong Yuan wouldn't give up so easily. The other person's attitude was cold, but he still didn't get tired of it. This kind of dogskin plaster was a match for Kong Mingming. As for Lin Yi, ever since Rin Zhong Yuan came over, he simply kept his mouth shut, as if he really had become a follower. In reality, if not for the Thunder Shin Vine, he couldn't be bothered to travel with these people. The five of them continued forward. After walking out of the mouth of the canyon, the front suddenly opened up. Lin Yi originally thought that this was at most a small island, but the scene in front of him shocked him. This was actually a desert. It wasn't a pure desert. Patches of vegetation could still be seen here and there, but at least 80% of what they could see was barren land. It wasn't to say that there wasn't an inch of grass, but it gave off a feeling of death. Ever since they arrived at Heaven Stage Island, every time he went on an adventure or a trial, Lin Yi would basically spend his time in a lush, primitive forest. He did not expect that this time would be an exception. What surprised him even more was that this undulating desert was boundless. It didn't feel like an isolated island in Zhonghai at all. Lin Yi was a little surprised, but his companions didn't seem surprised at all, as if they already knew about it. Thinking about it carefully, it wasn't strange. Morning Pride Academy was a purely female academy, and it had a close relationship with West Island. In the past, even if the trial of West Island was not open to the public, it was not necessarily forbidden for them, so it was normal to know about it in advance. After walking out of the mouth of the canyon, They couldn't see the other trial takers around. These people were all here for the treasures of heaven and earth. Acting separately was the minimum principle. Otherwise, if everyone gathered together, they would have to kill each other when they found some treasures of heaven and earth. That situation was obviously not what they wanted to see. It was not only inefficient, but also stupid. Wait, let's determine the route, Ren Zhongyuan suddenly said. Then he took out a map from his arms. Lin Yi glanced at it from a distance. It should be a map of an island, but this island was obviously much larger than he expected. In terms of area alone, it should be comparable to those big islands in the South Sea. Yi Xiaodian, who was touching Yao Jili in front, took out a compass from his backpack when he heard this. It looked very exquisite from a distance, and one could faintly feel the fluctuation of a profound formation. This should be a rare high-grade product on the market. No wonder he was the son of East Continent Academy. His equipment was really advanced. The two compared the map with the compass and soon determined the direction. Ren Zhongyuan pointed to a higher hillside in front of the left and said, "Go that way." Ren Zhongyuan took the lead again, and Yi Xiaodian and Yao Jili followed closely. Hui Yudi frowned, opened her mouth slightly, but did not speak, and followed the three people. Did they really come for the Thunder Xianrat Tan? Lin Yi couldn't help but feel troubled. Looking at how serious they were, it was obvious that they'd prepared for this. If that was the case, would his promise with Hui Yudi still be valid? Lin Yi frowned thoughtfully. Looking at the attitude of Ren Zhongyuan and others, he knew that they would definitely not share this rare treasure of heaven and earth with him, and even Hui Yudi might not get much. After all, it seemed that they were incompatible just now. If it really came to that point, they would inevitably fall out. At that time, should he continue to cooperate with Hui Yudi, or simply find a chance to directly take it? After all, if they really fought, the previous agreement would have nothing to do with it. No matter what he did, there was nothing wrong with it. Lin Yi followed them while calculating in his heart. Ren Zhongyuan and others were unaware of this. A mere burden of the early nascent soul stage was nothing in their eyes. These masters of the great perfection of the nascent soul stage did not even put him in their eyes. They did not know that they had become the prey of others. At this moment, they were still immersed in their arrogance and could not extricate themselves. Ren Zhongyuan led the way in front. The five people trekked in the desert for half an hour. Not to mention any crisis along the way, they did not even see a living creature. The scene in front of them was the same. Except for the desert, there was more desert. The only slight change was the terrain. Following the route pointed by the map, everyone found that the terrain under their feet was getting higher and higher. It was originally just a slowly undulating hillside, but now it had become a towering mountain range. The road ahead gradually became narrow, and on both sides were bottomless canyons. However, a desert was a desert after all. Even if the terrain was strange, the scene was really not good to look at. This kind of dull feeling was completely different from the expected crisis. Everyone even couldn't help but have the same doubt. How could there be treasures of heaven and earth in this place? However, things had already come to this point. Everyone could only continue to move forward, praying that this time they would not return empty-handed. Otherwise, all the feelings they had been looking forward to for so long would be wasted suddenly. There was a trace of inexplicable warning in Lin Yi's heart. The jade pendant sounded at the same time, and his face immediately changed. He quickly stopped, and at the same time, pulled Hui Yudi, who was not far in front of him. Chapter 4671. You? Hui Yudi subconsciously whispered. She didn't expect that Lin Yi, who had always been well-behaved and could even be said to be impatient with her, would suddenly make a move. However, before she could finish speaking, there was a sudden change in front of them. More than a dozen vines as thick as buckets suddenly soared from the ground. With a terrifying sound of breaking through the air, they swept towards the direction of the crowd at a speed that was difficult to be seen by the naked eye. Because of the previous repetition, everyone was more or less careless at the moment, and the attack of these giant vines was so sudden and so fierce that Ren Zhongyuan, Yi Xiaodian, and Yao Jili, who were walking at the front, had no chance to react at all and were instantly hit by these vines. Only Lin Yi, who was already vigilant, and Hui Yudi, who was pulled by him, barely escaped this disaster. However, Ren Zhongyuan and the other two were masters of the yuanying stage after all. Even if they were caught off guard and could not avoid it, they still made a response in a hurry. At the moment when they were attacked by this giant vine, Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian were covered with a layer of golden true energy at the same time. The vine seemed to be unable to shake the defense of this layer of golden true energy, giving Lin Yi the feeling that it was like the legendary golden bell cover. As for Yao Jelly, although she was not as rigid as Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian, her movement technique was extremely flexible. Her whole body twisted quickly like a water snake. At the last moment, she was barely able to avoid her vital parts, but she was inevitably scratched a little, not to mention that she was wearing a science soft armor, so this power was still bearable. Seeing this, Lin Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. Although her character was not good, there was no doubt about her strength. She was worthy of being an elite master from the East Continent Academy. If it was replaced by other masters of the yuanying stage, they may not be able to make such a timely response. However, the three of them were still covered in dirt. They were almost knocked down into the valley by these giant vines just now and were instantly whipped back. After retreating a distance with great difficulty, they stared at the giant vines in front of them that were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. What is this thing? While everyone was shocked, Hui Yudi couldn't help but look at Lin Yi. If it weren't for Lin Yi pulling her, she would definitely be like Ren Zhongyuan and the other two at the moment. She would not be injured, but she would definitely be very embarrassed. Everyone carefully retreated while carefully observing the giant vines that had appeared out of thin air. What was surprising was that such a large number of giant vines actually grew from the same root system. In other words, such an earth-shattering momentum actually came from the same plant. Lin Yi looked at the bottom of this terrible plant. Previously, it was difficult to detect because it was hidden in the sand, but at this moment, it was clearly seen that its huge roots had firmly penetrated into the entire mountain, completely blocked the road. How can there be such a strange plant? Seeing that the giant vines were about to attack again, Yao Jelly couldn't help but exclaim in horror. Everyone also couldn't help but look at each other. Just now, they felt that it was boring, but now it was really fun. From a moment of exchange just now, they could feel that this giant vine monster's strength was at least above the yuanying stage. Even if they joined forces, they didn't have much chance of winning against this strange existence. Hui Yudi retreated to a safe distance and carefully observed for a while. Suddenly, she said, "This is a dummy vine, a vine monster that has become a spirit. I've seen it in an ancient book before." Oh, upon hearing this, Lin Yi couldn't help but be a little surprised. He had seen all kinds of powerful spirit beasts, but plants were very rare. However, it wasn't that he had never seen them before. At least, there were similar existences in the mountains behind the North Island. During that trip to Half Moon Lake, if it weren't for the ghost that deterred it, Lin Yi would have already become a pile of fertilizer. Although Lin Yi's strength at that time was much lower than now, his intuition told him that although the dummy vine in front of him was strong, it was far from being comparable to the monster in the mountains behind the North Island. After all, the entire Half Moon Lake was the body of that guy. Even the ghost couldn't do anything to it, and the dummy vine in front of him was obviously not at that level. Lin Yi evaluated in his heart. Judging from the fight between Ren Zhongyuan and the others in the dummy vine just now, with his strength, he should be able to kill the dummy vine, but with the strength of the others, it was not so easy to say. That's right, I remember. After listening to Hui Yudi's words, Yi Xiaotian suddenly shouted, "This is the ancient battlefield, and there are remnants of artistic conception and spiritual energy everywhere. After the plants here absorb it, it is very likely that there will be a mutation. That's how the dummy vine came about. I'm afraid that it doesn't just absorb artistic conception and spiritual energy. Maybe even the remnant spirit of the battlefield will be swallowed by it. Otherwise, how can it become such a terrible monster?" Ren Zhongyuan said with a look of fear. It was pure luck that he wasn't injured just now. His protective golden bell was almost smashed by the giant vine. If that really happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. Ah, then what should we do? Yao Jilly became more and more frightened. Among the three of them, she was the most embarrassed. The shock that the dummy vine brought to her was naturally far more profound than the others. She immediately panicked and said, "We want to pick the long routes, so this is the only way, right?" You. Ren Zhongyuan's face suddenly changed, and he glared at Yao Jilly fiercely. It seemed that he was very angry with her for revealing the purpose of their trip. Yao Jilly reacted. There were not only the three of them present. Hui Yudi was fine, but there was also an outsider, Lin Yi, behind them. Forget it. It doesn't matter if that kid knows. Anyway, it has nothing to do with him. Yi Xiaotian mediated for her. In fact, Lin Yi was only at the peak of the early nascent soul stage. They didn't put him in their eyes at all. For the sake of Shanghai Tianhua's reputation, they could just give him some things. If he really dared to ask for rare treasures, then they would teach him how to behave. While the three of them were talking, Lin Yi couldn't help but secretly whisper, "What was this long route?" But in this way, the purpose of these three people was not the same as that of Hui Yudi. That was to say, that they didn't know that Hui Yudi was going to find the Thunder Xian Vine. Thinking about it carefully, it was normal. Although they were in the same school, the fierce competition could be said to be incompatible like fire and water. It was impossible to achieve a real sense of mutual exchange, especially when it came to strategic-level treasures like the Thunder Xian Vine. Hui Yudi could probably know it from Lu Ziyu, the master who was on good terms with West Island. People like Ren Zhongyuan might not have this way. R1152. Chapter 4672. Lin Yi turned his head and glanced at Hui Yudi, who happened to be looking at him at the moment. Not only because his previous reaction made her look at him in a new light, but also because she was giving him a look. Don't leak the matter of the Thunder Xian Vine, or these people would definitely become big trouble. There were dummies blocking the way in front, and everyone was unwilling to go back like this, so they were suddenly in a dilemma. Lin Yi and Hui Yudi, on the other hand, didn't really care. They weren't here for the immortal route in the first place, and they didn't even want to travel with these people. At this moment, they stood at the back and didn't have any intention of stepping forward to solve the problem. Senior brother, Yi, quickly think of a way. What should we do now? Should we change the route? Yao Jilly asked in a panic. Change the route? How is that possible? Don't you see that there are bottomless canyons on both sides? Even if we can find a second route, how long will it take? Our time is limited. Yi Xiaotian shook his head again and again. The trial time of Yuanying Stage Peak was at most 1 month. Although it was the longest compared to others, it was still very limited and couldn't afford to waste any time. Yes, even this mountain peak has such a terrible monster. Who knows what is in the bottomless canyon? Maybe it is a mass grave left from ancient times, and there are terrible existences in it that we don't even dare to think about. It's hard to say whether we can survive it or not. Ren Zhongyuan agreed. Doesn't that mean we have no other choice? Yao Jilly's face couldn't help but turn a little blue. Just now, it was only one of the giant vines that attacked her, but in front of them was a dense mass of dummies. These giant vines were simply overwhelming, and there were dozens or even hundreds of them. If they were a little careless, wouldn't they be smashed into pieces? There is no other way. There is only one way. We can't give up halfway. Let's go. Ren Zhongyuan took a deep breath, and the protective golden bell on his body appeared again. He braced himself and took the lead to kill the dummies in front of him. Even though he knew that there was a tiger in the mountain, he still had to go there. He did not want to appear cowardly in front of Hui Yudi, especially when there was such a loathsome person like Lin Yi. Although the disparity between them meant that they would not be rivals in love or competitors. What if this brat had ulterior motives and took the opportunity to belittle him in front of Hui Yudi? Yi Xiaotian and Yao Jilly looked at each other. They had no choice but to follow her. Before they made their move, Yao Jilly intentionally glanced at Hui Yudi and Lin Yi. With a mocking tone, he said, Don't tell me the two of you intend to just watch and pick up the spoils. Huiyuti coldly snorted, and without saying a word, she stepped forward to attack the dummy vine. Although she wasn't willing to travel with these people, she wasn't shameless enough to do so. Moreover, the other party wouldn't let her enjoy the fruits of their labor. Lin had originally thought that for a delicate girl like Huiyuti, the martial technique she used would definitely be on the gentle side, just like Yao Jieli's water snake-like movement technique. After all, both of them were from the Morning Pride Academy. The martial technique they used shouldn't be too different. However, when Huiyuti made her move, his eyes suddenly lit up. The girl's martial technique was elegant with speed and decisiveness. It was even better than Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. When he saw Huiyuti, who was like a butterfly, easily cut off a giant vine with one palm, Lin couldn't help but smack his lips. He touched his chin and sighed. You really can't judge a book by its cover. Looking at the four people flying up and down to deal with the dummy vine. Although Lin, he didn't want to help, he was also embarrassed to really stand on the side and watch the show. His figure immediately swayed and moved forward. However, he was purely acting. At first glance, it seemed that the giant vines were whistling around him. It seemed to be in imminent danger, but in fact there was no threat at all. He could deal with it easily with the butterfly micro steps alone. As for the super butterfly micro steps and the faster butterfly micro steps, it was purely overkill to use them at this time. Of course, he wasn't just dodging. Occasionally, he'd make a move, but it was only when Huiyuti was in danger that he'd sneakily lend her a hand, giving her the finishing blow. It had to be said that this dummy vine was really fierce and terrifying. So many Yuanying stage perfection joined forces to besiege them, but they were still suppressed by it. Everyone was hit by the fire chi, and the situation could only barely be maintained at 50-50. If they were not careful, they would all be wiped out. He took this opportunity to carefully observe. Although these four people were all at the Yuanying stage perfection, when they really fought, Huiyuti was the strongest, followed by Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian, and Yao Jieli's strength was the weakest. In a short moment, Yao Jieli had been hit by the giant vine from the back, and she spat out a mouthful of blood on the spot. If it weren't for the cyan soft armor to offset most of the damage for her, she might have died on the spot. In contrast, Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian had a defensive martial skill like the Golden Bell, so they were slightly calmer than Yao Jieli, but they were not much better. The damage that the Golden Bell could withstand was limited, and the power of these giant vines had reached this critical point. Once it was broken, the two of them would not feel good either. Among the four people, Huiyuti's performance was the most dazzling. She did not have the defense of a Golden Bell, and her movement technique was not as weird as Yao Jieli's. Every move was beautiful, but could quickly subdue the enemy. Before this, it was hard for Lin Yi to imagine that a weak woman who knew how to act coquettishly could be so powerful. Every time a giant vine got close to her, she did not dodge or avoid it. Now, more than a dozen giant vines had been broken under her feet. This result was more than the other three people combined. After Ren Zhongyuan and the others saw Huiyuti's performance, they couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. As a man, if they were defeated by a woman at this time, they would be laughed at, especially Ren Zhongyuan. How could he have the face to pursue Huiyuti in the future? She just casually mentioned it, and he was ashamed to death. What he didn't know was that Huiyuti's extraordinary victory was at least partly due to Lin Yi, who had helped her out from behind the scenes. Otherwise, she might have been injured like Yao Jieli. Ren Zhongyuan immediately roared like a madman, and the protective golden bell covering his body suddenly exploded. The giant vines within a radius of 50 feet were all shattered into powder in an instant. A large number of people were killed and injured in an instant. Chapter 46-73. If one did not understand in advance, the enemy would suffer a great loss. Even if he underestimated the enemy, he might be injured. It was indeed a brilliant martial art from East Continent Academy. After Ren Zhongyuan, Yi Xiaotian also did the same thing. The protective golden bell suddenly exploded another giant vine. In this way, more than half of the nearly 100 giant vines of the dummy vine were removed. The pressure on everyone was greatly reduced, and it was obviously not as difficult to deal with as it was at the beginning. After fighting bitterly for another incense stick of time, the dummy vine was finally destroyed by everyone. At this time, except for Lin Yi, everyone was injured. Needless to say, Yao Jili was the weakest. Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian took the initiative to explode the protective golden bell. Although the effect was great, they also lost the means to protect themselves. After that, they were injured one after another. As for Hui Yudi, under the special care of Lin Yi, her injury was the lightest. She was only slightly scratched, which was negligible. A follower who only knows how to take advantage of others. Useless. Yao Jili, who was the most seriously injured, glared at Lin Yi. She wanted to target Hui Yudi the most, but unfortunately, the pile of giant vines at the opponent's feet really made her unable to speak. Who asked her to be less than a fraction of the opponent's? We didn't expect him to be of much use in the first place, and we'd be thankful if he didn't drag us down. Anyone with even a little bit of self-awareness and shame would know what to do now. Continuing to follow us with a thick face is going to get us killed. Ren Zhongyuan said with a meaningful look. The meaning of his words was obvious. He wanted to drive Lin Yi away. He wanted this follower to know the difficulties and retreat, so as not to ruin the good things between him and Hui Yudi. Senior brother Ron is right. Hui Yudi suddenly nodded at this time. Lin Yi paused slightly when he heard this, but Ren Zhongyuan was instantly overjoyed. Even Hui Yudi said this, which meant that she had seen the performance of the battle just now, and had finally recognized who the useless trash was, and who the thigh she should hug tightly was. Still not leaving? You don't know what's good for you. Do you want us to send you off? Ren Zhongyuan grinned at Lin Yi. His face was full of schadenfreude. Lin Yi raised his eyebrows. Just as he was about to speak, Hui Yudi suddenly said, "Let's go. This place is too dangerous. I don't want to go. You guys can go by yourselves." Hui Yudi didn't even look at the crowd after she finished speaking. He gave Lin Yi a look. He turned around and left. No. What was going on? I was talking about this brat just now. Not you, junior apprentice sister you die. Please don't misunderstand. Ren Zhongyuan was dumbfounded for a moment before he came to his senses. He immediately wanted to chase after her. I know, this is my own idea. It has nothing to do with you guys. I wish you all good luck. Hui Yudi had already made up her mind. She was clearly prepared to use this as an excuse to get rid of everyone. She didn't want to waste her time with them anymore. It was okay for her, but the trial time for Lin Yi, who was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, was not as long as a month. What? Senior apprentice, Sister Hua, you don't want the everlasting root anymore? This time, even Yao Jili was shocked. The everlasting root was the dream of all of them. To say that Hui Yudi didn't care about it was absolute nonsense. This was a rare opportunity to find the everlasting root. How could she give it up halfway because of such a small matter? Hui Yudi stopped in her tracks and nodded at them with a seemingly sincere expression. She admitted, "This is your fate and fortune. I don't have this fortune. If you don't have this strength, then don't even think about it. I still have this bit of self-awareness." Coward. Yao Jili's expression changed. Hui Yudi's words were basically pointing at the mulberry tree and scolding the locust tree. Her strength was definitely stronger than hers. She was indirectly scolding her for having wishful thinking. "Don't worry, I'll protect you. Don't worry, I definitely won't let you get hurt." Ren Zhongyuan hurriedly patted his chest as a guarantee. Lin Yi glanced at him playfully. This guy was already in a sorry state. He hadn't even wiped off the blood on his face, yet he still had the nerve to pat his chest. He really didn't know what to say. There's really no need. It's too dangerous here. The dummy vine is already so difficult to deal with. It almost wiped out all of us. And this is just the beginning. I don't want to take this risk. You guys don't have to persuade me anymore. Hui Yudi's tone was firm. Ren Zhongyuan still didn't give up and wanted to persuade her a few more words. However, Yao Jelly, who was at the side, spoke up first. All right then. Since senior sister Hua is so afraid of death, we can't force you. Let's say goodbye here. We'll meet again someday. The reason why she specifically invited Huiyuti to join them was not out of kindness. It was purely because she was afraid that this little girl and Lin Yi would sneak a step ahead of them and find the everlasting route before them. And now, based on the map and the current situation, there was only one route. As long as Huiyuti didn't follow them, there was no chance of finding the everlasting route. Since the outcome was already decided, what else did she have to worry about? With her and Huiyuti's irreconcilable relationship, would she still be worried that the other party wouldn't be able to get the everlasting route and wouldn't be able to get a share of the loot? All along, although Yao Jelly and Huiyuti were known as the Morning Pride duo, in reality, she had always been inferior to the other party. This was because her grandfather's power wasn't as great as Lu Ziyu's, and because she wasn't as strong as the other party. Even when it came to looks, which women cared about the most, she was still inferior to the other party. Not only did she hate this woman who suppressed her in all aspects, but she even wished for the other party to die. If curses could be used, Huiyuti would have long been cursed by her to the point where she would never be able to reincarnate. Moreover, this time, it wasn't just Huiyuti alone. She also brought along a burden like Lin Yi to make up the numbers. With this brat's identity as Shanghai Tianhua's direct disciple, she couldn't kill him. What if he didn't have eyes and wanted a share of the loot? Although this was purely wishful thinking, it was still a problem that had to be faced. Now that Huiyuti took the initiative to quit, Lin Yi naturally couldn't stay. Even if he wanted to stay, everyone would definitely kick him out. Suddenly, there were two guys who wanted a share of the loot. For Yao Jelly and the others, this was exactly what they wanted. Yes, she couldn't wait for the two of them to get away as far as possible. Ren Zhongyuan looked at Yao Jelly and then at Huiyuti, who turned her head and left. He still wanted to try to save them. After all, this West Island trial was a rare opportunity to get along. After this village, he didn't know if there would be another chance like this. Chapter 4674. At the same time, Yi Xiaodian also glanced at Huiyuti with greed. He did have some thoughts about Huiyuti, but he was not stupid. With his identity and background, it was not a problem to have a mistress other than Yao Jelly. But this mistress would definitely not be Huiyuti, unless Huiyuti had fallen, or her master, Lu Ziyu, had completely lost his power. Why would she follow him? Yi Xiaodian. He had no intention of giving up on Yao Jelly. This girl was much more exciting when she was coquettish than those so-called girls. Moreover, their families were old friends. Coveting Huiyuti was purely a fantasy. The most important thing now was to serve Yao Jelly well. Only then would he be able to obtain more benefits and benefits. Let's go. Huiyuti nodded to Lin Yi, and the two immediately went back the way they came, parting ways with Yao Jelly and the others. Junior sister Yuti. Renjun shouted angrily, but the other party did not turn her head at all and just waved her hand indifferently. Ren Zhongyuan watched helplessly as Huiyuti left, especially with a potential love rival by her side. He suddenly had an urge to chase after her. He didn't want to give the two of them a chance to be alone. A man and a woman alone with Huiyuti. This was a scene that would only appear in his dreams. However, Ren Zhongyuan could not take this step in the end. After Huiyuti went back, he could still chase after her, but if he missed this opportunity, there would not be a second chance. Looking deeply at Huiyuti's back, Ren Zhongyuan gritted his teeth and turned to follow the footsteps of Yao Jelly and Lu Ziyu. This time, he must get the longevity route. At that time, as long as he divided a little bit, he could let Huiyuti throw herself into his arms. The two sides parted ways. Lin Yi and Huiyuti walked for half an hour, until Lin Yi's divine sense could not lock onto the three people, and then he finally took a break. So, but they don't know about the Thunder Xianrot Tan. I thought they were our competitors. Lin Yi suddenly said in a faint tone. Why should we tell them about such an important treasure as the Thunder Xianrot Tan? Wouldn't that be looking for trouble for myself? The few of them aren't easy to deal with. If they really find the Thunder Xian vine, it's hard to guarantee that they won't have any thoughts that they shouldn't have. At that time, I will be outnumbered. Huiyuti shook her head. That might not be the case. At the very least, that Renzhong Yuan will help you. Lin Yi smiled, but he was even more certain in his heart. For the Thunder Xian vine this time, Huiyuti was probably preparing to borrow his 5 elements physique. Otherwise, Renzhong Yuan and the other two were all at the peak of the nascent soul realm, and they were all disciples of the East Continent College who knew each other well. Even if she did not have a good relationship with Yao Jieli, it should not be a big problem if it was just a cooperation. At least, it would not be as unreliable as Huiyuti herself said. On the other hand, Lin, he was just an expert at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no friendship between the two sides, no matter how you looked at it. The 3 people were more suitable to cooperate with each other. The only difference was his 5 elements physique. However, what was the relationship between the 5 elements physique and the Thunder Xian vine? This was a problem that needed to be clarified. Of course, Lenny did not intend to open his mouth to ask it this time. When it came in handy, the other party would naturally say that talking too much now would do more harm than good. Huiyuti was silent for a moment. After turning her head to look at Lin, she changed the topic and said, "Your strength seems to be very strong. Oh, isn't it just the peak of the early nascent soul realm? In front of you experts at the peak of the nascent soul realm, this is considered strong?" Lin curled his lips and smiled. For many geniuses who can challenge those who are stronger than them, the strength on the surface is nothing. I believe that you are this kind of person. Huiyuti smiled slightly, paused, and said, "Thank you for before." It was nothing. Lin waved his hand indifferently. Previously, when they were dealing with the humanoid vine, although he secretly helped in the chaos, others like Renzhong Yuan could not see it, but after a few times, Huiyuti would definitely be able to feel it. Otherwise, she would be too slow. If that was the case, Lin would really have to consider the matter of cooperation. If he cooperated with such a slow girl to find the Thunder Xian vine, it would be fatal. Can I ask, out of curiosity, what exactly is your strength? As a partner, I think we should first clarify this matter so that we do not make mistakes during the operation. Huiyuti looked at Lin with a burning gaze. As you can see, Lin shrugged non-committally. Of course, he would not reveal his true strength to a stranger he met for the first time. Moreover, there was no need for him to lie. At the very least, he was at the peak of the early nascent soul realm. There was no doubt about this. I'm talking about your true strength. The humanoid vine, even a few of us could not escape unscathed. Only you were not injured. If you say that you are at the peak of the early nascent soul realm, I will definitely not believe it. Huiyuti shook her head with certainty. I'm just good at body techniques. It can't hit me, so of course it won't get hurt. Lin smiled nonchalantly. He didn't bother explaining and kept his mouth shut. Huiyuti looked deeply at Lin and did not continue to ask. Now is not the time to get to the bottom of it. Since the other party was not willing to confess, then it was enough to know. While the two were talking, they had already returned to a fork in the road. Huiyuti took out a map from her backpack and compared it to the map. She nodded at Lin and said, "This is the way." After saying that, she immediately led the way. Although it was a bit unreasonable for a girl to take the risk to lead the way, who asked Lin, he did not know the route. Huiyuti would not tell him this kind of thing in advance. After the previous incident, Lin had become a bit hidden in her heart. She still had to be careful. The sky gradually darkened, and the road ahead began to become a bit difficult to walk on. In addition to the fact that they had been on the road for 6 hours, both Huiyuti and Lin were somewhat tired. With their strength, it did not matter how long they walked. The key was to advance in this place. Every step they took had to be careful and vigilant. Facing the monotonous desert scenery, they had to be on high alert at all times. After all, the previous humanoid vine was only a small warning. Who knew what kind of terrifying existence they would encounter next? Under this kind of omnipresent spiritual pressure, Even a peak nascent soul expert would not be able to withstand it for a long time. Chapter 4675. Therefore, they had to find a way to cross as soon as possible, so that even if they couldn't get the Thunder Xianrot Tan, they wouldn't return empty-handed along the way. It was dusk. Although the sky was gray, the outline of the setting sun could be vaguely seen. He couldn't help guessing what the gray was. It wasn't like sea fog, nor was it the unique miasma of the South Island. Looking carefully, there seemed to be a trace of blood in it, giving people the feeling that it was a cloud stained with blood. This was not impossible. After all, this was the ancient battlefield. Even if everything was lacking, there was absolutely no lack of blood and death chi. Suddenly, Huiyuti in front of him let out a groan, and then she fell to the ground without warning. What happened? He couldn't help but be shocked. He didn't notice anything unusual, and the jade pendant didn't warn him. What the hell was this girl doing? Did she not give up and deliberately fell down to win his sympathy by pretending to be pitiful, so that she could take the opportunity to ask for more after she succeeded? Wasn't a hole in her brain a little too big? If he was such an easy person to be hooked, how could he bargain with her so quickly in the beginning? What was the point of doing this kind of superfluous thing? Looking at Huiyuti with a strange expression, he stood behind her for a moment with his hands clasped. However, Huiyuti didn't get up by herself, nor did she have any intention of calling for help. Did something really go wrong? He was a little surprised and walked to her with doubts. Only then did he find that Huiyuti's forehead was sweating, and her face was pale and even a little black. She seemed to be in great pain. Even his breathing had started to become unstable. He couldn't help but be shocked again. An expert at the peak of the nascent soul realm couldn't even stabilize her breath in such a short time, which meant that a great change must have happened to her. But just now she just walked normally, and he didn't find any danger. Could it be that she had a relapse of some old disease? What's wrong with you? He quickly helped Huiyuti sit up and let her lean on him so that at least her breath could be a little more stable. Huiyuti didn't answer. Her breathing was rapid and her eyes were lifeless. She probably couldn't even hear what He was saying, let alone reply. He frowned. He had no choice but to examine her body himself. However, when he lowered his head, he was shocked. Previously, it was difficult to notice it because the dress had covered it. It was only at this moment that she inadvertently moved. Only then did he realize that there was something hanging from her calf. At first glance, it looked like a small lizard, but it had 8 legs, and its head was triangular like a viper's. Its eyes were suffused with an alarming blue light. What is this? Linyi's heart skipped a beat. Huiyuti's sudden reaction had to have something to do with this thing. The thing was small, but it gave off an intimidating aura that wasn't any weaker than the mannequin. In Linyi's opinion, it was even more than that. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. At this time, Huiyuti suddenly rolled her eyes, and her head drooped down powerlessly. This gave a big shock. This little girl wouldn't die just like that, right? He had spent so much time with Huiyuti just for the Thunder Mystic Vine. Now, he hadn't even seen its shadow. If she was killed by a small lizard, how could he bear it? He quickly checked Huiyuti's breath. Although it was weak, it hadn't completely disappeared. Only then did he let out a sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't dead, it was fine. He was also considered a miracle doctor, so he had a good way of treating injuries. Since the source of the problem was this lizard-like monster, the first thing to do before treating Huiyuti's injury was, of course, to kill this thing first. Linyi's eyes were filled with murderous intent, and he immediately punched out without saying anything. His fist looked ordinary, but he had used 50% of his strength. This strange thing was able to defeat Huiyuti in such a short period of time, so it was not ordinary at all. He absolutely could not underestimate it in the slightest. After punching out, he originally thought that this lizard-like monster would either be killed by him or turn to attack him. However, to his surprise, facing his attack, the lizard-like monster just dodged to the side indifferently. It still didn't have any intention of letting go of Huiyuti's calf. At the same time it dodged, Its evil blue eyes looked up at Lin Yi from below. It seemed to be mocking and provoking. A mere beast also dared to be so savage. Lin Yi was instantly enraged. He no longer took it lightly. Accompanied by a low dragon roar, a small five-element murderous aura suddenly shot out from his palm and hit the lizard-like monster in an instant. With a chi sound, the lizard-like monster was hit head-on by the five-element murderous aura. Only then did it finally let go of Hui Yuti's calf. After rolling on the ground a few times, it twitched wildly and died in the blink of an eye. Lin Yi looked at the corpse of the lizard-like monster on the ground. Such a small thing could actually force him to use his killer move. The ancient battlefield ruins were indeed full of danger. There were all kinds of strange threats everywhere. After dealing with the lizard-like monster, Lin Yi checked Hui Yuti's condition again. However, he found that at this moment, her breath had become increasingly weak. If this continued, she might really die. At this moment, Hui Yuti's calf, which had originally been as smooth and white as jade, had turned purplish-black under the illumination of the moonlight. In particular, the wound that had been bitten by the lizard monster was continuously oozing out a terrifying black liquid, and there were faint signs of rotting. Poison. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Although he could roughly judge from the appearance of the lizard-like monster, at this moment, he really saw that the poison was acting up. Moreover, it was acting up so violently. This was really troublesome. If it was just a simple injury, even if it involved the internal organs, it would not be a big deal in the hands of Lin Yi. After all, he had the universal true chi. However, it was hard to say if she was poisoned. Just the universal true chi alone was not enough. If it was not handled properly, Hui Yuti's leg would be completely crippled. She might even lose her life. Lin Yi may be a miracle doctor, but that was limited to the common world. He didn't know anything about the weird poisons on this island, and he'd been busy practicing for the past 2 years. He'd never had the time to do any systematic research, especially when it came to these weird spirit beasts. He'd never even heard of them before, so how was he supposed to treat them? Chapter 4676. Senior, do you know what this thing is? Helpless, Lin Yi had no choice but to seek help from the ghost, the former Azure Dragon. This guy should know everything about spirit beasts. Well, strictly speaking, this thing is not a spirit beast, but an insect subject. The ghost thing pondered for a moment. This is an insect. Lin Yi paused as he looked at the carcass on the ground. No matter how he looked at it, it looked like a mutated venomous lizard. He didn't expect it to be an insect. That's right. If I remember correctly, its full name should be eight-legged tooth insect. Although its intelligence isn't very high, its body is highly toxic, and the toxicity is very strong. Even a profound ascending stage master can be easily taken down. The ghost explained. Even a profound ascending stage master can be taken down. Lin Yi was shocked. In his impression, ordinary poisons had no effect on high-level cultivators. Many poisons could easily kill ordinary people, but the effect was greatly reduced for high-level cultivators. Especially at the nascent soul stage, it could be said to be no threat at all. He didn't expect the toxicity of this strange thing to be so strong. Yes, this thing is a rare poison. You can keep its corpse. Maybe it will come in handy in the future. It may be used for alchemy or forging. The ghost thing said, "Okay." Lin Yi moved the body of the eight-legged tooth claw worm into the space of the jade pendant. Then he looked at Hui Yuti, whose breath was getting weaker and weaker. What about her? If we don't think of a countermeasure quickly, she will die. From the beginning until now, he'd spent so much effort following her for so long, and he hadn't even seen the shadow of the Thunder Xian vine. If Hui Yuti really died in a place like this, then he'd really be screwed. What should we do? It's very simple. You just need to help her cure the poison. The ghost thing said indifferently. How do I cure this? Lin Yi couldn't help but scratch his head. This is not difficult. The most primitive method will do. Use your mouth to suck it out. The ghost thing laughed. Huh? Use my mouth? Lin Yi almost choked. He coughed for a while and said, "Cough. Wouldn't I be dead then?" "Senior, Didn't you just say that this poison can even easily kill a profound ascending stage master? Others will die, but you won't, the ghostly thing said in a confident tone. Why? Lin, he was surprised. Don't think that I don't know that you're immune to all poisons. Didn't that old Lin make it for you? Your physique has been tempered since you were young. Now that you have become stronger, it will only become more stable. No matter how strong the poison is, it will be useless on your body, said the ghostly thing. You even know this? Lin, he was even more astonished. The ghost had been with him for quite some time now, but that was only a short time before he came to Sky-Class Island. If he hadn't mentioned it before, there shouldn't be any reason for him to know about it, especially since the matter of his immunity to poison had been exposed to Old Man Lin. Oh, when I had nothing to do, I casually looked through your past and your divine knowledge, see. So I still have some impression of this kind of thing. The ghostly thing curled its lips indifferently. What? You peeped in my memory? Lin, he was shocked. He had never thought that there would be such a thing before. If it could casually look through his own memory, then wouldn't there be no secrets in front of this ghostly thing? This feeling of being seen was too scary, right? Although this ghostly thing was not an outsider. At least at this stage, Lin, E, and it were bound together. But even so, this feeling of having all his secrets seen by someone else, it really made people shudder just thinking about it. Hey, I have nothing to do anyway, so I use it to kill time and relieve boredom. Don't worry, I'm not interested in your little secrets. The ghostly thing laughed. Can I ask, Senior, where did you learn this shameless behavior from? Why do I always meet such bad people? Lin, he was suddenly speechless. He didn't feel it when he was not familiar with it, but now that he was familiar with it, he suddenly realized that this ghostly thing was also a playful old man. He couldn't help but think of the old man. Don't mutter, kid. Hurry up and treat her poison. It's already spread. If you don't hurry up, this girl will die for sure. The ghostly thing interrupted with a strange laugh. All right, seeing that the purplish-black part on Huiyuti's calf was getting bigger and bigger, Lin, he didn't dare to think about those useless things anymore. After laying Huiyuti flat on the ground, he immediately clenched his teeth and lay down. At this moment, Huiyuti's wound had already melted, and black liquid was constantly flowing out. When Linny got closer, he almost vomited on the spot. He used the last of his willpower to resist the nausea and put his mouth on it. While treating Huiyuti's poison, Lin, he secretly felt helpless. He thought to himself that when this girl recovered, he had to renegotiate with her about splitting the profits. Otherwise, she would have sucked the poison for nothing. Lying on Huiyuti's calf, Lin, he didn't feel the slightest bit enchanting at this moment. Although he had a super strong physique that was immune to poison, the poison of the eight-legged tooth crackworm was really terrifying. Every time he sucked from Huiyuti's wound, there would suddenly be a burning pain on his mouth. After a while, the poison in Huiyuti's body finally subsided. The originally purplish-black calf gradually recovered a trace of color, and the somewhat weak breath also began to stabilize. However, this made Lin suffer. Although the poison had no effect on him, the burning pain was real. Not to mention anything else, his mouth was almost numb now. Although his mouth was numb, Lin, he didn't dare to relax at all. Although Huiyuti's condition was showing signs of improvement, the poison of the eight-legged tooth crackworm could easily kill a profound ascending stage master. Even a little bit of it could take Huiyuti's life. What's more, although Lin, he was immune to poison, he didn't dare to take it lightly. What if the poison was too overbearing and he was accidentally poisoned? Lin, he was lying next to Huiyuti's leg to treat her poison. At this moment, two sneaky figures suddenly appeared not far away. They were two men. Although they didn't wear a uniform, there was a badge with a double cloud spreading wings pattern on their neckline. This kind of badge was also worn by Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. It was the symbol of Soaring Cloud Academy. Chapter 4677. Because of their low strength, these two people were probably at the bottom of all the participants of the West Island trial. They were disciples of the East Continent's soaring cloud academy, and they could follow the envoy to the West Island, but their strength was actually at the bottom of all the participants. This was really a rare thing. The sun was setting, and it was getting dark at this time. The two people's strength was low, so no matter what kind of ferocious creatures or other trial takers they encountered, it could be a fatal threat to them. So it was not strange that the two of them walked so stealthily. Every step they took was very careful. The two of them moved forward bit by bit, while muttering and complaining to each other. Alas, I don't know what Brother Ren and Brother E are thinking. They specially brought us 2 followers to the West Island, but now they leave us behind at such a critical time and let us act alone. It's such a dangerous place. If we're not careful, we'll be killed. Hey, Sun Baolu, are you stupid? This trial is a rare opportunity for Brother Ren and Brother E to be alone with beautiful women. How could they take us with them and ruin the fun? One of the men wearing a bamboo hat curled his lips and said, "They don't have to leave us behind on purpose. At worst, they can follow them a little further. We won't disturb their good time, and we can help them carry things." Didn't they do the same when they went out to play before? Sun Baolu shook his head helplessly, then lowered his voice and said, "According to my speculation, in fact, Brother Ren and Brother didn't leave us behind for this thing at all, but to find some very rare treasures of heaven and earth. What do you think, Liujo?" "Hiss, now that you mention it, I really remember. Before we came to the West Island, when Brother E and Sister Yao talked, I heard a few words. It seemed that they were really looking for some treasures of heaven and earth. They had prepared for it for a long time in advance. They just kept it a secret from us." Liujo couldn't help but feel a little resentful when he said this. I already guessed this. This is the fate of us followers. Good things never happen to us, but bad things happen to us every time. Hey. Sun Baolu laughed at himself. This was something that couldn't be helped. Who asked these people to have no background? In order to establish a foothold in the Eastern Continent College, which was a dangerous place like the Dragon Pool and the Tiger Cave, one must have either strong strength or a deep background. Otherwise, they would be swallowed whole. People like them could only rely on young masters like Ren Zhongyuan and Yi Xiaotian. There was no other way out. The two of them grumbled softly as they carefully explored forward. Suddenly, Liujo stopped in his tracks. His eyes were looking straight ahead, and his mouth was agape for a long time. "What are you doing? Was he possessed by a ghost?" Seeing this, Sun Baolu couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He thought they were being targeted by some unknown monster. With their strength in the peak of Goldcore realm, once such a situation occurred, the outcome would be really terrible. No. Look over there," Liujo stammered. He couldn't utter a complete sentence for a long time, as if he was having a convulsion. He pointed ahead in a daze. Liujo looked in the direction of his finger. With just a glance, he was stunned and couldn't come back to his senses for a long time. After a long time, he gasped in disbelief and whispered, "Oh my God, the world is really big and full of strange things. In this kind of place, we can actually meet someone who is having sex in the wild. My God, this woman's body looks so fucking hot. It's more than that. Don't you think this woman looks familiar?" Liujo continued to stare straight ahead and said, "Hiss, now that you mention it, it's true. Oh my God, isn't this Hui Yudi, one of the 2 beauties in the morning? Why isn't she with Brother Ren? Instead, she is having sex with another man here. I didn't know she was so wild before." Sun Baolu was shocked. More than wild, she is almost unrestrained. I used to think that this girl was an iceberg snow lotus, always with a pure and holy look. I didn't expect that she would become so coquettish when she came to West Island. She actually let that man lie under her skirt and suck. My eyes are so dazzling. Liujo rubbed his hands with his eyes shining. This kind of scene was so exciting that any man couldn't hold it. TSK. I also want to go and lick her, even in my dreams. Sun Baolu couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Hey, do you think I don't want to? Liujo rolled his eyes at him and said with pity, "All the good cabbages are taken by pigs. It's a pity that no matter how wild this little hussy is, she is doomed to have no share in it." If you dare to have this wicked idea, aren't you afraid that Brother Rin will kill you? I'm just saying, I don't have the guts. Son Baolu shrank his neck and swallowed a few mouthfuls of saliva greedily before saying, but this was Shuelian is actually having sex with another man here. Isn't our Brother Rin wearing a big green hat on his head? Should we go and take care of it? Hearing this, Li Yuzhou couldn't help but be a little tempted. At this time, if he went and took care of it, wouldn't it be a good opportunity to take advantage of them? Even if he couldn't touch them, at least he could see them more clearly. After all, they were the two beauties in the morning, goddesses in the eyes of ordinary disciples like them. However, Li Yuzhou immediately suppressed this tempting idea. He patted Sun Baolu's head angrily and said, "Do you dare to go? That guy is a master of the nascent soul stage." At this time, in order to treat Huiyudi's poison, Lin, he had to circulate his true qi all the time to prevent the poison from invading his body. Although his body was immune to poison, there was always a higher mountain. What if the poison of this 8-legged tooth insect was more violent than imagined? There was no chance for this kind of thing to happen again. Once something went wrong, he would definitely die. Therefore, at this moment, the aura of a master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage was fully revealed. Even though there was a distance between them, Li Yuzhou and Sun Baolu could see it clearly. The two of them were only in the gold course stage. At this time, of course, they didn't dare to jump out and ruin the good thing. Put yourself in their shoes and think about it. If they were having sex in the wild and were disrupted, they would definitely kill in anger. This man was a master at the peak of the early stage of the nascent soul stage. The two of them together were not his opponent, not to mention Huiyudi, a master at the peak of the nascent soul stage. They didn't dare to move. What do we do? Are we just going to sit here and watch? Sun Baolu frowned unwillingly. Since he couldn't take advantage of it, he could only enjoy it from a distance. Chapter 4678. Ugh, then there's nothing to say. Let's run quickly. Sun Baolu shrank his neck. Compared to admiring Hua Shuelian's coquettish look, his own life was more important. Don't worry. Leave some evidence before we run. Later, we will let Brother Rin enjoy it. Li Yuzhou said as he took out a digital camera from his backpack. In order to curry favor with Huiyudi, Ren Zhongyuan had spent a lot of money to buy it from the Central Chamber of Commerce. Unfortunately, Huiyudi didn't even look at it before throwing it back. So, after going around in circles, it still ended up in the hands of his follower. No matter where Ren Zhongyuan went, his follower had to carry it for him. This time was no exception. Click, click. Li Yuzhou took 2 pictures in a row in front of him. Then he turned around and ran without saying anything. Even if the other party was busy having sex in the wild before and didn't find him, he would definitely be discovered this time. If he didn't run, he would be a fool. Sun Baolu looked at it reluctantly. Then he followed Li Yuzhou and fled in a hurry, for fear that the other party would recover. They didn't know that the two of them had been noticed by Lin Yi from the beginning. Although the distance was not close, and he couldn't hear what the two of them were talking about, Lin Yi had received training since childhood. Always observing the environment was the introductory course of an assassin. Even without divine sense, he could clearly detect the two of them. However, he didn't dare to further lock with divine sense at this time. After detecting the two of them, he felt that a light flashed, and then the two of them ran away. It wasn't that Lin didn't want to get up and catch these two sneaky guys. The problem was that he was busy treating Huiyudi's poison. He must be fully focused at all times. He didn't even dare to release his divine sense. He was afraid that he would be disturbed if he was distracted. How could he stop halfway? These two weren't important to Lin Yi, so it didn't matter if they ran. As long as they didn't do anything bad, the urgent matter at hand was to suck out all the poison in Huiyudi's body as soon as possible. Otherwise, not only this chick would suffer, even a Thunder Schwanning would definitely have no chance. After another half an hour, Lin Yi's whole mouth was completely numb by the venom. Huiyudi's calf regained some color, and it wasn't as ghastly as before. Huiyudi moaned as she opened her eyes. This was a normal reaction after most of the toxins in her body had been sucked out by Lin Yi. However, she immediately screamed when she opened her eyes. Anyone who woke up and saw a man burying his head under her skirt would definitely have the same reaction. Huiyuti was both angry and embarrassed. She screamed and lifted her leg to kick Lin Yi. However, the result made her even more frightened. She suddenly found that she couldn't move her legs. At this moment, although Lin Yi had helped her suck out most of the poison, there was still some left. Moreover, the leg was the most important part of the bite. Even with Lin Yi's strong physique that was immune to poison, just helping her suck out the poison made his mouth numb. If she could lift her leg and kick him at this time, then she would really be seeing a ghost. You big pervert. What have you done to me? Why did you fix my body in place and not let me move? Huiyuti was so embarrassed and angry that tears came out. She had a pure body and had never even held a man's hand before. How could she endure such a sudden and huge stimulation? At this moment, she wanted nothing more than to perish together with this shameless beast, Lin Yi. Huh? What nonsense are you talking about? Lin Yi was stunned when he heard this. He then raised his head with a strange expression. The worst thing was that the corner of his mouth hadn't been wiped clean, and there was saliva that could easily make one's imagination run wild. What made people even more speechless was that his mouth was a little numb. At this moment, he spoke in a muffled voice. People would think that he had swallowed something in his mouth. Huiyuti almost fainted when she saw this. At this moment, not only her legs, but her entire lower body was basically numb. Moreover, Lin Yi just happened to be lying under her skirt. She thought that Lin Yi had been sucking on her private parts. Immediately, she was shocked and angry. She scolded, "You shameless! You bastard! Fuck!" Lin Yi finally understood the misunderstanding and immediately stood up. He coldly stared at Huiyuti and said, "Little girl, what do you want? I risked my life to help you suck out that strange worm's fatal poison, and you still call me a shameless bastard? Fine. Since it's like this, you can slowly lie here. I won't accompany you anymore, bye-bye." The relationship between Lin Yi and this little girl couldn't be said to be good. This time, he had risked his life to treat her poison, which was already extremely benevolent. He didn't expect that the other party didn't even know a fart and actually scolded him. Really, a good person can't be a good person. A dog that bites Lu Dongbin doesn't recognize a good person's kindness. Seeing that after Lin Yi finished speaking, he patted his butt and left without hesitation. Huiyuti suddenly remembered that she seemed to have been bitten by something. Then very quickly, her whole body went numb and she fainted. So it really wasn't Lin Yi's doing? Did I misunderstand him? Thinking of this, Huiyuti subconsciously moved. She discovered that other than the leg that wanted to kick Lin Yi, although the other parts of her body were a little numb, they weren't completely immobile. Especially the upper half of her body that was less affected by the poison. She could basically move freely. Huiyuti was a little dumbfounded. She wasn't a one-track-minded idiot. The facts were in front of her, and it could be said that it was obvious. Just now, the poison of a strange worm could knock her down in the blink of an eye. With such a strong poison, if no one detoxified it for her, the consequences would be obvious. But now, her body was much better. This meant that Lin Yi was indeed detoxifying her just now. It was just that because the poison was in a special place, this posture was more likely to be misunderstood. Wait, you wait. Huiyuti didn't dare to hesitate anymore. She hurriedly screamed and wanted to get up to chase after Lin Yi. Not only did she wrongly blame a good person, but if Lin Yi really abandoned her in a fit of anger, with her current state, she couldn't even stand up. Being left here alone was simply impossible to call for help. At that time, if anything happened, the consequences would be unimaginable. "What else do you want?" Lin Yi turned around and glanced at her. He said unhappily, "Isn't it exactly what you want for a shameless bastard like me to stay away from you? Lest I do something to you that can't see the light of day again. It's good to break up like this. Don't worry, I also save trouble. It's the best of both worlds. Don't go." Huiyuti's pretty face blushed. If it wasn't for the veil covering her face, it could be seen that her face was so red that it was about to drip blood. She weakly muttered, Sorry, I wrongly blamed you. Chapter 4679. Lin he turned around and walked back to Huyuti's side. He didn't really want to leave. After all, leaving a weak girl who couldn't move in this dangerous wilderness was something he couldn't do. Thank you. Huyuti thanked him softly with a red face. At the same time, she was a little surprised. She thought that Lin he would really leave after suffering such injustice. She didn't expect him to be so easy to talk to. She really didn't see it before. She didn't know why, but after this misunderstanding, Huyuti felt that Lin he had become a lot more reliable. At the very least, it was a completely different image compared to the one she had when she was trying to extort money from him. Unexpectedly, just as her impression of him improved, Lin Yi's next words caused the trust that she had built up with so much difficulty to collapse by a lot. You're welcome, but we have to have a good talk. Talk about what? Huyuti had just woken up. Her head was still a little swollen, and she couldn't react for a moment. Of course, it's to have a good talk about repayment. You can't be so naive to think that I would save you for nothing, right? In any case, you're a genius disciple from Morning Pride Academy. You shouldn't be so ignorant of the ways of the world, right? Lin Yi looked at Huyuti with a sneaky smile. You want? Huyuti saw Lin Yi's expression and immediately became nervous again. It was just that before, it was pure shock and anger, but now, she couldn't help but have some shyness of a young girl. She was originally beautiful and moving, but now, she became even more covetous. There was a kind of temptation that could be plucked by anyone. Lin Yi's eyes couldn't help but light up. This time, I almost lost my life when I helped you suck out the poison. I believe that you understand the dangers involved the most. Of course, the repayment is not lacking. Lin Yi paused. Looking at Huyuti's little heart thumped wildly, then said, So, when the time comes, we have to change the way we split the Thunder Xian Vine. You get 20, and I get 80. You don't have any objections, right? You. Huyuti was dumbfounded. The nervousness and shyness in her heart disappeared in an instant. She thought that Lin he had seen something he shouldn't have seen under her skirt and wanted to use this opportunity to make some unreasonable demands. After all, it was common for someone to repay a life-saving debt with their body. Huyuti had always been very confident in her looks, and it was because of this that she had to cover her face. Otherwise, men would chase after her like flies that couldn't be driven away, and there would be too many troubles. Under such circumstances, she naturally thought that Lin he would also make such a request, but she never expected that. This guy had been beating around the bush for half a day just to say this. Huyuti was both angry and amused at the same time. Looking at the serious Lin Yi, she was speechless for a long time. She really didn't know how to describe this feeling. If she was someone from the secular world, she might say, I've even taken off my pants, and you're showing me this. What about me? This is already a very small return. Okay? Think about it. I saved your life. Is there a problem with that? Lin Yi said with a matter-of-fact expression. Huyuti didn't know why, but she was suddenly in a good mood, and the corners of her mouth curled up as she said, No, we agreed on 370. This is this. Then didn't I let you suck it for nothing? Lin Yi glanced at her. Anyway, I'm done. It's useless for you to go back on your word. 370 is 370. As for you detoxifying me, I can think of another way to repay you. Huyuti said with a proud smile. She didn't feel this way before, but now she felt that bickering with Lin Yi wasn't a bad thing. Are you burning the bridge after crossing the river? Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh, but his face still had a victorious expression. He said with a smile, It's a pity that you're burning the bridge a little too early. You haven't even completely crossed the river. Aren't you digging your own grave by burning the bridge now? What do you mean? Huyuti looked at Lin Yi's expression and couldn't help but twitch. It's very simple. Aren't you still so numb that you can't move? This means that the poison hasn't been completely sucked out. What I helped you just now was only some of the poison left on the surface. However, during this period of time, some of the poison has already been absorbed by you. It is already integrated into your body and is difficult to remove. So, I estimate that in a few more hours, the poison will enter your vitals. Linny said with a faint smile. Huiyuti was no longer in a good mood. She was instantly frightened by Lin Yi and was at a loss of what to do. She said with a face full of fear, "Is this true or false? You're not lying to me. Whether it's true or false, won't you know after feeling it yourself? You should know better than me about this kind of thing. Take a look at how far the poison has developed in your body. If the poison has really been completely removed, why is your leg still unable to move?" Lin Yi said indifferently. Huiyuti didn't dare to be negligent. She carefully felt it according to Lin Yi's words, and her heart sank. It was just as Lin Yi said. The poison that hadn't been sucked out had already integrated into her body through her blood. If it continued to develop, even the gods wouldn't be able to save her. How is it? Have you thought it through? Lin Yi crossed his arms and stood calmly at the side as he looked at her. That Kai Zi was right. You really are a eunuch. Huiyuti couldn't help but be a little angry. She pitifully blinked her eyes and pouted. I've already begged you so much, but you still want to take advantage of me. And it's this kind of advantage. What? Then do you want me not to be a eunuch and take advantage of you in other ways? Or do you want me to just? Lin Yi heard this and couldn't help but smile playfully. Huiyuti was suddenly speechless. Only then did she realize the ambiguity in her words. Her pretty face blushed again. This time, even her veil was slightly reflected. She quickly buried her head in her chest and said in a muffled voice, Okay. 280 is 280. Quickly help me detoxify. That's more like it. It may be a little painful next. You have to bear with it." Lin Yi smiled and immediately knelt on the ground again. He put his mouth on the other party's wound. His mouth was originally numb, but now that he had rested for a while, it had completely recovered. Oomph. Huiyuti let out a low moan as she felt Lin Yi sucking on her lips. She blushed at her own reaction. Her legs were still numb, but she could more or less feel them now because of the large amount of toxins that had been expelled from her body. Chapter 4680. She didn't know what Lin Yi's reaction was, but Huiyuti was already blushing. She let a man lie under her skirt and suck on her wound, and she couldn't help but let out such an ambiguous moan. What was going on? As a girl with a pure heart, Huiyuti was obviously very sensitive to this aspect of shame. After letting out a subconscious moan, she immediately gritted her teeth and held it in. She couldn't let out a second moan, even if she died. Otherwise, how could she face Lin Yi in the future? Just thinking about this kind of thing was embarrassing. However, after a short while, Huiyuti's body suddenly trembled slightly, and she couldn't help but let out another moan. In fact, this couldn't be blamed on her. If Lin Yi was simply sucking on her wound, she could actually barely endure it. However, at this moment, there was suddenly a warm, vital energy in her body. It flowed through her meridians, and every time it flowed, it would bring something from her body that shouldn't be there. It was the poison that the eight-legged tooth claw worm had fused into her body. Not only was this feeling not painful at all, but it was also very warm and comfortable. In addition, as the poison decreased, the stimulation from Lin Yi's sucking on her wound became stronger. Huiyuti couldn't help but feel like she was floating. When she came back to her senses, she felt that something was wrong with her whole body. What's wrong with me?" Huiyuti said in a daze, as she resisted the comfortable and stimulating feeling that constantly attacked her scalp. However, this pitiful willpower was quickly shattered by the next wave of feeling. What was this girl thinking? Listening to Huiyuti's faint moans, Lin Yi couldn't help but be a little speechless. He had painstakingly sucked out the poison for her, and at the same time, he had to control the all-purpose vital energy to swim in her body. He thought this process would be more painful, but he didn't expect her to sound like she was enjoying it. Although he was speechless, Lin Yi couldn't stop and say anything at this time. As long as Huiyuti resisted and didn't move, he would let her do whatever she wanted. However, Lin Yi soon felt that he had made a mistake because he found that Huiyuti's moans didn't stop. On the contrary, It showed signs of becoming more and more frequent and intense. It was simply out of control. Listening to this seductive voice, even Lin, he couldn't help but feel a little restless in his heart. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Although this chick was a little straightforward when they first met, most of the time she still had the temperament of an iceberg snow lotus. He didn't expect her to be so open at this time. Little did he know that it was because of the poison. Huiyuti couldn't control her feelings at all. As a master of the peak yuanying stage, the powerful restraint was not useful at this moment. It was completely the instinctive reaction of the body. However, even though she couldn't control herself, Huiyuti's mind was still very clear. She could clearly see all of her reactions. She was so embarrassed that if there was a crack on the ground, she would have already crawled into it. Call me whatever you want. After I recover my ability to move, just don't kick me. Lin, he muttered in his heart. He immediately concentrated on using his all-purpose true chi to eradicate the last bit of poison. Unexpectedly, just as he was about to succeed, Huiyuti suddenly cried out again. A warm current seemed to be uncontrollable. Lin Yi's position was simply unbiased, and he just happened to be drenched. This scene came too suddenly. Lin, he was completely caught off guard, and his whole body was immediately stunned. He faintly felt that it was somewhat familiar. After thinking for a long time, he finally remembered. It was the same situation when he was treating the young Miss Poison in the past. He was simply drenched to death. Lin, he stared blankly for a long time and didn't move. After a long time, he lowered his head with a speechless expression. He eliminated the last bit of poison in the other party's body and silently stood up. At this moment, Huiyuti's whole body was already limp. Even though she knew that she had regained consciousness, she still curled up on the ground and didn't dare to move. She had an ashamed look on her face. Needless to say, this chick looked even more beautiful at this moment. Lin, he suddenly shook his head speechlessly. He thought to himself, the one who was drenched just now was me. I haven't said anything yet, and you're still shy. However, to be honest, Lenny didn't have much resistance or dissatisfaction with this matter. He didn't have much resistance in his heart either. Anyway, he didn't smell any strange odor, and after all, she was a rare beauty. In his opinion, this matter was a loss that he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But in the eyes of other men, it might be a dream, so he just endured it. The two of them were silent for a long time. Lin, he helplessly waited at the side, but Huiyuti buried her head like an ostrich and didn't move. It was almost midnight. How long was this chick going to be shy? However, at this time, if it was any other girl, they would be ashamed. Huiyuti's reaction was normal. Linny thought about it and had to take the lead to break the silence. He comforted her. In fact, you don't have to be embarrassed. It's a natural reaction of a human body. I just gathered the poison absorbed from your body through the meridians and then used this method to expel it from your body. So it's expected. There's nothing to be shy about. These words were simply nonsense. It was just to find a justifiable excuse for Huiyuti. In fact, it was not the case at all. The little bit of poison that her body had absorbed had already been crushed in a powder by Lin Yi's 5 elements murderous aura. Compared to the original all-purpose chi, the 5 elements murderous aura had a more obvious healing effect. This was a new discovery that Lin Yi had just made during the process of curing the poison. In the past, except for people like Lin Yi who had the 5 elements physique, the 5 elements murderous aura was an extremely fatal existence for any cultivator. It was so fierce and overbearing that no one could withstand it. However, in the process of curing the poison, Lin Yi suddenly discovered that the 5 elements murderous aura's healing effect was far stronger than the all-purpose chi. More importantly, it also had the characteristics of the all-purpose chi. As long as he controlled it well, it would not cause any harm to the opponent. In the end, it could be absorbed by the opponent. Simply put, it was simply an upgraded version of the all-purpose chi. It was extremely overbearing when used to attack, and it was always successful when used to heal. This was the best description for the 5 elements murderous aura. This sudden and unexpected joy made Lin rejoice. Being able to find the giant electric eel in the deep sea was simply a blessing that couldn't be cultivated for several lifetimes. The five elements' murderous aura itself was an endless, huge treasure. Lin, he shrugged his shoulders at Huiyuti, who was still lying on the ground. He had already paved the stairs for her. If she still didn't get up, then he really didn't know what to do. Chapter 4681. In any case, he couldn't just lie down like this. Lin, he didn't want to waste time on this kind of thing. Looking at Huiyuti's limp appearance, to be honest, Lin, he was also quite puzzled. He could understand the first few snorts, but why did it become like this in the end? Only God knew. He couldn't understand it himself. A voice popped up in Lin Yi's mind, just as he was cursing Lin Yi. You've probably made her high. Puff. Cough, cough, cough. When he was immersed in thinking, this suddenly happened. Lin, he was almost scared crazy. He choked a few times before he could barely hold it in. He complained speechlessly. Senior Ghost, you scare me to death. How am I scared you? Didn't you say that only God knows? That's why I helped you analyze it. The ghost laughed strangely. There was even a hint of schadenfreude in its tone. Okay, but Senior, can you pay attention next time? Don't make me crazy. It's not good for you. Lin, he shook his head helplessly. He paused and added, Senior, your English is quite good. If I didn't know you were the former Azure Dragon, I would definitely fight with anyone who dared to say that you were a native of the Heavenly Stage Island. Hee, I can even learn the ancient language of you humans without a teacher, let alone this kind of bird language. Do you believe it? The ghost said in a disapproving tone. Lin, he was speechless again. The existence of this ghost was really unreasonable. In addition to the most instinctive fighting and killing, it even had such a terrible talent for this kind of thing. How could the students in the secular world endure this? Just as Lin, he was communicating with the ghost, Huiyuti seemed to understand Lin Yi's words just now. She reacted a little slowly. She blushed and whispered like a mosquito. Really? You're not lying to me? The reason why she was so shy was that she had been wondering whether she would be a fucking woman. No matter how innocent Huiyuti was, she was still a nascent soul great circle expert. Moreover, she wasn't young at all. Although no one would mention this to her, she could still read books. Within the scripture depository of the Morning Pride Academy, there were all sorts of books, some of which were related to this aspect. There were also some very specialized books, specifically researching on how to dual cultivate with a man. After all, it was a female academy. There were bound to be some disciples who chose this path. It was also under such an atmosphere that Huiyuti had once flipped through such books out of curiosity. Thus, she knew that some women would have such a reaction at that time. However, not all women would be like this. Only a small portion of them would be like this. She had always thought that she was very pure. So how could she be like this? If that was all, it would have been fine, but the problem was that she actually sprayed Lin E all over Lin E when he was treating her. How could he still have the face to go out and meet people, especially in front of Lin E? No, what's in it for me to lie to you? Can you give me 10% more? Lin E couldn't help but laugh in his heart. However, on the surface, he acted serious. Otherwise, he couldn't guarantee that this girl wouldn't be embarrassed to death. Right now, the most important thing was to hurry up and find the Thunder Xian Vine. He didn't have so much time to waste. After hearing Lin Yi's answer, Huiyuti immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Although she was still a little shy, she wasn't as ashamed as she was before. Since this was a normal detoxification process, it meant that it wasn't her problem. It meant that she wasn't the kind of woman described in the books. That was enough. Lin Yi's expression at this moment had a bit of a smile that wasn't a smile. In fact, it was only because he was communicating with the ghost through his divine sense. However, in Huiyuti's eyes, it naturally had a different meaning. This girl was so shy that she couldn't even lift her head. After finally finding a way out, she immediately blushed. It's all because of you. I'll deduct 10% from you. Let's make it 30-70. Huiyuti mustered up her courage to look at Lin E and said angrily. This time, Lin, he was completely speechless. What was wrong with this woman? He risked being buried with her to save her life, but in the end, she ate this little benefit back. Wasn't she turning hostile a little too fast? It seemed that the old saying was right. Only women and vile people were difficult to raise. What? Do you have an opinion? Hui Yuti saw Lin Yi's strange expression, and her pretty face blushed. She snorted and said, "Let me tell you, if I tell others about today's matter, for the sake of my reputation, my master will definitely kill you." Huh. Lin Yi suddenly widened his eyes. He was just wondering why this girl suddenly became a little unruly. In the end, when he suddenly heard this sentence, he almost choked to death. This kind of thing could actually be used to threaten him. What kind of strange thinking was this? If she went out now, didn't she know that the one who would be the most humiliated would be herself? Or was it really, as she said, that she had always been cultivating, and her mental age was far younger than ordinary people, so she didn't understand the basic ways of the world? Seeing that Lin Yi was stunned by her words, Hui Yuti's mouth curled up proudly. She finally got rid of the embarrassment from before. Her eyes curved into two delightful arcs, and she said with a proud smile, "Now you have nothing to say, right?" Humph. Then it's decided happily. Hui Yuti was instantly in a good mood. These were the words that Lin Yi had used to mock her. Now, she could finally use them on Lin Yi. Giving him a taste of his own medicine, this kind of feeling was great. Hee, there's no use in going out. Who knows, it might even have the opposite effect. Lin Yi faintly smiled disapprovingly. What do you mean? Hui Yuti looked at Lin Yi suspiciously. You said it yourself. Your master and the deputy island master of Shanghai Tianhua are good friends. Since I'm his personal disciple, who knows, after your master hears about this, he might simply push the boat with the current and directly marry you to me as a cultivation companion. At that time, there's no medicine for regret. Lin Yi slightly raised his eyebrows and smiled. Humph. In your dreams. Hui Yuti's pretty face blushed slightly as she lightly spat. Her cheeks were once again filled with fiery clouds. The sensitive word cultivation companion caused her body to subconsciously go limp, and she instinctively recalled the embarrassing scene just now. Chapter 4682. Humph. You really know how to take advantage of the situation. If I give you a ladder, you can go to the sky, right? My master and deputy island master Shangwan are good friends. That's true, but your deputy island master Shangwan's personal disciple. Hui Yuti had a look of disbelief on her face, but when she said this, she suddenly froze. Not to mention anything else, Lin Yi's previous intimate performance with Shanghai Laner was real, and although his realm was only at the peak of the early stage of nascent soul, it could be seen from the previous fight with the humanoid vine that his real strength was by no means so simple. At least, he was an existence that could fight against enemies of a higher level. In addition, he just treated her with a magical method. Each and every one of these things was not something that an ordinary disciple of the North Island could have. As the saying goes, a great teacher produces a great disciple. A person like Lin Yi, no matter how one looked at it, could not be taught by an ordinary cultivator. The person who could be his master must be an unfathomable big shot, and the person in the North Island who met this condition seemed to be Shanghai Tianhua. You can't really be? Hui Yuti couldn't help but change her expression, unable to hide her surprise, and asked. Almost. Lin Yi smiled indifferently. He did not intend to hide this kind of thing, nor did he intend to deceive Hui Yuti. Although there was no official master-disciple relationship, in fact, everyone in the 3 pavilions of the North Island, from top to bottom, had long regarded him as the personal disciple of Shanghai Tianhua. Even Shanghai Tianhua himself had a similar attitude. Otherwise, he would not pay so much attention to Lin Yi and would not take the initiative to try to help Lin Yi. If Lin Yi announced to the public that he was his personal disciple, his attitude must be tacit and maybe even fake it for real. Is this a prophecy of mine? Hui Yuti suddenly didn't know what to say. She had said this before to deal with Ren Zhongyuan and the others, but she did not expect it to be true. It was so strange. This word is not used to describe a good thing, right? Don't bully me because I'm uneducated. In any case, I went to university properly. He corrected him with a straight face. These words were a little shameless. It was true that he was cultured, but that was all learned before he debuted. As for going to school, it was simply a pretense. It was pure nonsense. University? Oh, okay. Huayuti stared blankly for a moment, her eyes sizing up Linny again, as if she wanted to see through all of his secrets. After a moment, her eyes suddenly lit up and she said, "That's right. Since you and Shangwan Laner are so close, then she must be a good match that Deputy Island Master Shangwan has designated for you. Say, if she finds out that you've done something with other girls outside, will Shangwan Laner kill you out of anger?" When she said this, Huayuti's tone was full of schadenfreude, as if she really felt that she had grasped hold of Lin Yi's weakness. After all, letting a direct disciple marry a descendant of a relative would make the relationship between the two parties closer and more reliable. This kind of thing could be seen everywhere on the Heaven Stage Island. Shangwan Laner was the pearl of Shangwan Tianhua. If she wanted to get married, the other party would either be a nephew of some super big shot or a direct disciple of Shangwan Tianhua. There was no third choice. And this Lin, although he was quite irritating at times, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. However, it was undeniable that this person was extremely outstanding in all aspects. He was indeed a rare, one-in-a-million match. The pavilion closest to the water enjoys moonlight first. Shangwan Tianhua would definitely not let him marry another woman. No way. Why would you want to kill me? Lin, he didn't know what was going on. Why not? Absolutely, this is the most basic common sense. Which woman is willing to let her husband be with another woman? Not to mention Shangwan Laner, the little princess of the North Island. Huayuti said with a face of certainty. Hee, then do you know why I specifically came to participate in this low-level broken trial? Lin Yi smiled at Huayuti's determined gaze. Low-level? Broken trial? Huayuti was a little stunned. The West Island trial was ranked among the top 5 Heaven Stage islands, and the strength of this trial was generally at the nascent soul stage. Before, the dummy vine had already made them, the masters of the nascent soul stage, extremely embarrassed, and this was still a low-level broken trial? Of course, I can kill all the people here at will. Do I have nothing better to do? Why would I come to such a place to waste time? Although Lin Yi's tone was a little joking, there was no exaggeration in his words at all. This West Island trial was really not difficult for him. With Lin Yi's strength, the most suitable and valuable trial for him should at least be a dangerous place open to the masters of the profound ascending stage. There was no pressure at all now. It was simply whimsical to want to have a big harvest. If he could successfully get the Thunder Xian vine this time, he would be satisfied. As for breaking through in strength, he didn't even think about it. Huayuti couldn't help but roll her eyes at Lin Yi when she heard this. This tone was really big, and it sounded like a joke, but through all the previous things, she faintly felt that there was a little possibility. This guy was really unfathomable. She couldn't help but ask, "Then what are you doing here?" Because of Shangwan Laner, she said she didn't want her best friend to marry others, so I can only reluctantly do it. Lin Yi shrugged with a smile. Best friend? Who is her best friend? Huayuti didn't respond for a while, and then suddenly remembered. She patted her head and said, Ning Shuefe? For most male cultivators, the main purpose of this West Island trial was not the treasures of heaven and earth, but to compete for the princess of West Island. However, she was a girl, so she didn't take this matter to heart from beginning to end. Until now, she suddenly remembered there was such a thing. Yes, who else could it be? Lin Yi smiled. Damn! Huayuti's eyes became more and more strange. She looked up and down at Lin Yi again, which almost made Lin Yi mad. Then she said faintly, Isn't it said that only those very powerful people can have 3 wives and 4 concubines? What's more, Ning Shuefei is the princess of West Island. Even if a man marries her, she must be the master. Can he marry other women? Won't the people of West Island go crazy? Am I not powerful? Lin Yi replied half-jokingly. As for the second question, he directly ignored it. Although this was indeed a very tricky problem, as long as he was strong enough, everything could be solved. Chapter 4683. Not the so-called people of West Island. Since Shanghai Tianhua could see Lin Yi's potential, so could Ning Shangling. As long as she knew that Lin Yi could become the reliance of the whole West Island one day, then nothing would be a problem. I really don't know where your confidence comes from. I don't want to talk to you anymore. I want to deduct your share, okay? Hurry up, Hui Yudi said as she slowly got up from the ground. After being paralyzed for such a long time, Hui Yudi's body was somewhat not used to it. She staggered before standing firm, but fortunately, Lin Yi was standing next to her. He reached out and held her in his arms. Hui Yudi let out a low cry and subconsciously held Lin Yi's arm, then fell into his arms. With the soft and fragrant body in his arms, Lin Yi raised his eyebrows subconsciously, and the corners of his mouth curved into a playful smile. Apart from other things, this girl's body was quite elastic. Hui Yudi suddenly screamed and hurriedly escaped from Lin Yi's arms. She blushed and didn't dare to look at him. She lowered her head and walked forward desperately. Hey, be careful. Don't be bitten by some weird things like eight-legged tooth claspworm again. Seeing this, Lin Yi hurriedly chased after her. It was midnight now, and he could only distinguish the scene by the faint starlight above his head. Besides, he was in such a dangerous place. He was fine, but it was still very dangerous for Hui Yudi. Hui Yudi hurriedly slowed down, but she still didn't dare to look back at Lin Yi. She was so shy not purely because she was hugged by Lin Yi, but because the smell of the man just now made her body a little soft instinctively. Subconsciously, the previous scene appeared in her mind. Although Lin Yi said it was a normal process of detoxification, but she was always a little worried that she would do it again. If so, she would really be ashamed to see others. What the hell is this girl doing? Behind him, Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. He had no choice but to quickly chase after them. At the same time, he deliberately spread out his divine sense in case something like this happened again. If this happened a few more times, time would be wasted. Hui Yudi lowered her head and didn't say a word. After that, Lin Yi didn't know what to say, so he simply kept his mouth shut. As a result, the atmosphere became somewhat ambiguous in the silence. Lin Yi was still all right. At most, he could only admire this girl's graceful back view from behind. However, Hui Yudi had obviously become somewhat reserved and unnatural, for some unknown reason. In her mind, the scene of Lin Yi lying on top of her unconsciously surfaced, especially the most embarrassing scene. Hui Yudi felt as if her whole body was on fire when she thought about it. She even felt as if her ears were about to be burned off. It was too embarrassing. Although this matter was only between her and Lin Yi from beginning to end, and no one else would know, and there was an absolutely legitimate reason for detoxification, but even so, this also made Hui Yudi, who was an iceberg snow lotus in everyone's eyes, very embarrassed. It was precisely because of this that Hui Yudi no longer felt confident even when facing Lin Yi. Her speech was also not as free and unrestrained as before. Instead, it was replaced by a bashful and shy attitude. Even she herself was very unfamiliar with this kind of attitude of a little girl. This kind of thing was simply unimaginable in the past. She was a snow lotus on a mountain of ice. Any man, no matter how outstanding, would fall for her. Any man in front of her, no matter how outstanding, would be involuntarily attracted to her, and she would only disdain them. How could it be like now, where her mind was filled with the shadow of a man? The two of them walked in this strange silence. Lin Yi didn't say anything about this. Putting himself in her shoes, it was normal for a girl like Hui Yudi to be so shy when encountering this kind of thing. Only shameless women like Murong Zhen or Si Tuqian would treat this kind of thing as a common occurrence. It was just that the silence along the way was really depressing to the point of making people uncomfortable. In reality, it wasn't only Lin Yi who felt this way. Huiyuti's desire to break this strange silence was even greater than his. Otherwise, she would really be immersed in her shyness and embarrass herself to death. Unfortunately, she really couldn't think of any topic at the moment. At this moment, there was even an inexplicable hope in the depths of her heart that Lin-Yi would be able to stir up some small topics that the two of them could argue about. This was because not only would that solve this awkward and depressing atmosphere, but she also felt that it was actually quite interesting to have a little argument with this fellow Lin-Yi. However, this was just Huiyuti's thoughts. After all, she and Lin-Yi had only met for the first time. It couldn't be said that they truly understood each other. Especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere, whether it was her or Lin-Yi, it was very difficult to find a suitable topic to divert their attention. Ambiguity would ferment, especially in this kind of awkward atmosphere. The feeling of ambiguity would constantly attack the depths of the mind. This was a normal person's natural yearning for beautiful things. Unless one's heart was dead, the mind would naturally think in this direction. Just like the current Huiyuti, she simply felt that she couldn't extricate herself. Every once in a while, Huiyuti would think of ways to sneak a glance at Lin-Yi. Then, she would immediately turn her head back like a thief. It was a pity that her actions, which she thought was not a trace, were clearly seen by Lin-Yi. He couldn't help but laugh. This girl was actually quite interesting. Along the way, the two of them walked like this for the whole night. It was different from the expected danger. This night's journey was not as dangerous as Lin-Yi had imagined. After all, according to reason, many monsters were nocturnal, and the night was the most dangerous time. However, in reality, it was the opposite. This night, they did not encounter any accidents. Lin-Yi couldn't help but guess. Could it be because this was a desert? The night was silent until it was almost dawn. Lin-Yi, who was walking at the back, suddenly moved. Accompanied by a light dragon roar, a five elements murderous chi suddenly swept over the head of Huiyuti in front of him. "Ah!" Huiyuti suddenly exclaimed. She thought that Lin-Yi was going to do something to her. She quickly turned her head to look at Lin-Yi. For some reason, she didn't know why, but she said with a red face, "What are you doing?" "What do you mean I'm doing?" Lin-Yi looked at her strangely and pointed in front of her. "Look for yourself. You are an expert at the peak of nascent soul stage. Can you walk a little more seriously?" Chapter 4684. Huiyuti suddenly felt a wave of fear when she thought about how this thing had unknowingly flown above her head without her even realizing it. She had seen the corpse of the eight-legged tooth crackworm before, and the deterrence that this thing gave off was even greater than the eight-legged tooth crackworm. However, at this moment, this thing had already been pierced through the middle of its body, and it was clearly dead. It was clearly the masterpiece of Lin-Yi's five-element killing intent just now. "Thank you." Huiyuti blushed again. This time, it wasn't because of the awkwardness from before, but because of her own carelessness. A true expert must always be on guard, and because of the distracting thoughts lingering in her mind, she had obviously thrown this rule of survival to the back of her mind. "You're welcome." Lin-Yi smiled slightly. Ever since the eight-legged tooth crackworm incident, he had been using his divine sense to sense everything around him, so as not to repeat the same mistake. Moreover, Lin-Yi had also accepted Huiyuti as a teammate in his heart, and was not constantly on guard like before. The warning from the jade pendant naturally included her as a teammate. The two continued forward. After experiencing this shock, Huiyuti's state was finally a little more normal, and she became more cautious as she moved forward. Not long after, she suddenly stopped. "What's wrong?" Lin-Yi couldn't help but ask curiously, thinking that they had encountered some danger. However, there was nothing strange in his divine sense, and the jade pendant didn't have any intention of warning them. "Something's wrong. I smell a familiar smell. It's not far ahead." Huiyuti frowned. "A familiar smell?" Lin-Yi looked at her strangely. He then walked past her and said without looking back, "It's this way. You could just follow behind me. I'm not lying to you. I'm very sensitive to smell. There's definitely danger ahead." Huiyuti hurriedly shouted. I didn't say that I don't believe you, but even if there's danger, we still have to move forward, right? We can't just give up halfway because of a little danger, right? Lin, he waved his hand. As he spoke, he had already walked far away. Hui Yudi clenched her teeth and hurriedly chased after him. Linny was right. Even if they knew that there was a tiger in a mountain, they still had to go there. It was impossible to obtain a heavenly treasure like the Thunder Xian vine without taking any risks. After walking for less than 300 feet, Lin Yi suddenly felt a hint of alarm in his heart. At the same time, the jade pendant's warning sounded. He immediately shouted, "Retreat!" Just as Lin Yi and Huiyudi retreated, dozens of thick vines burst out of the ground. It was the dummy vine again. You have a good nose. Lin Yi calmly glanced at Huiyudi. Because the dummy vine was hidden deep underground, even his divine sense could not detect it before it launched its attack. He did not expect that this little girl would be able to smell its scent from so far away. She had obviously only come into contact with it once. It was simply unimaginable. I've always been talented in this area, and I've also gone through special training in order to be useful in some special occasions. Huiyudi replied, "Well, in those places where divine sense can't be used, your nose can really come in handy." Lin Yi smiled slightly. "What do we do now?" Huiyudi looked at the dummy vine in front of her and suddenly felt as if she was facing a great enemy. Although she had retreated in time under Lin Yi's reminder, the problem was that there was only one way. If they didn't get rid of this dummy vine, the Thunder Xian vine was simply an extravagant hope. Previously, she had joined forces with Renzhong Yuan and the others to attack. The four of them at the nascent soul stage barely managed to kill the dummy vine, and all of them were injured. And now, the giant vines of the dummy vine in front of them looked even thicker and more terrifying than the previous one. However, only she and Lin Yi were left. The situation was not optimistic no matter how one looked at it. "There's nothing to do, just get rid of it," Lin Yi said as he dashed forward. The humanoid vine's hundreds of vines started to dance in a frenzy, as if they were sharks that had smelled blood. They lashed out at Lin Yi with all their might. This frightening stance gave Huiyudi a huge fright. If it were her, she might have been turned into minced meat with just one hit. However, Lin Yi did not dodge it. His body suddenly surged with a monstrous heat, and his whole person suddenly seemed like a fire god descending to the world, shrouded in raging flames, making people unable to look directly at him. Even if it was a plant that had become a spirit, it was still a plant after all. The dummy vine was most afraid of fire. After discovering that it was not good, it wanted to escape in a flash. The giant vines that were dancing wildly retreated faster and faster, and the offensive and defensive momentum was inadvertently completely reversed. However, the dummy vine was still too late to escape. Lin Yi's frenzied fire fist suddenly shot out, hitting its most vital root. Accompanied by a burst of strange screams, the entire dummy vine was completely enveloped in flames. In just a short period of time, this behemoth that even a nascent soul stage master was helpless against was completely burned, leaving only ashes on the ground. Huiyudi looked at this scene dumbfounded, and her whole person was completely dumbfounded. She thought that with her and Lin Yi's strength, if they wanted to pass through here, they would have to fight a bloody battle. Maybe they would pay the price of serious injuries, but she did not expect that in such a short period of time, the dummy vine was so easily dealt with by Lin Yi. "What are you still doing? Let's go." Lin Yi looked at her and said, "Oh." Only then did Huiyudi come back to her senses and hurriedly followed the footsteps of Lin Yi. This time, it was her turn to look at Lin Yi's back, and she suddenly couldn't help but be a little lost in thought. Previously, it was still a little vague, but this time, she really saw it. Such a powerful and terrifying dummy vine was easily killed in a second. Although Lin Yi was at the peak of the early nascent soul stage, his real strength was far more powerful than an ordinary nascent soul stage master. In the Eastern Continent Academy, where geniuses came forth in large numbers, it was not strange to challenge someone at a higher level. But to surpass such an abnormal existence like Lin Yi, even in the entire Eastern Continent Academy, it was simply a monster. What made Hui Yuti's imagination run wild was not simply because of Lin Yi's strong performance, but this feeling of hiding behind a man and being protected by him in battle made her feel a little strange. This was something that had never happened before. Not to mention that with her strength, she rarely encountered real danger, and even if she did encounter it, although there was someone like Ren Zhongyuan who repeatedly said that he would protect her, when it really came to a critical moment, he often couldn't even take care of himself. So how could he talk about protecting her? Only the current Lin Yi was truly protecting her. Since the limit of a Yuanying stage master was only 1 month, then the limit of a peak early Yuanying stage master was only half a month at most, or even 10 days was very likely. This time was extremely tight. If something happened on the way, it would be over. This time it was related to Ning Xuefei's lifelong event. Lin, he did not want to end up in a tragedy. Therefore, he had no other choice. Along the way, he must cut the Gordian knot. If he could get rid of a roadblock like the humanoid vine in one move, then there would be no need for a second move. In this way, Hui Yuti, a nascent soul stage master, became his assistant. To be precise, she was purely a bystander. She didn't even have a chance to make a move. Generally, by the time she found a threat, Lin, he would have already dealt with it in one move. Being sheltered under the arm of a mere peak early Yuanying stage master, if it was any other nascent soul stage master, they would feel awkward. At least they would lose face, but Hui Yuti didn't have such a thought. On the contrary, she felt that this feeling was very wonderful. It made her feel at ease from the bottom of her heart. Lin, he swept through everything in front of him, and Hui Yuti followed behind him, letting her imagination run wild. She'd stop occasionally to confirm the direction and route they were taking. The two walked like this for half a day, and the sky was starting to darken again. Lin, he suddenly stopped in his tracks, and stopped in his tracks. Bang! Hui Yuti didn't know what she was thinking at this time. She bumped into Lin Yi's body, causing Lin Yi to stagger. Only then did she react, and suddenly blushed. Seeing Lin Yi turn his head, she rolled her eyes and quickly complained, "Why did you suddenly stop?" Lin Yi was speechless for a while. He looked at this chick and helplessly pointed to the front, but he didn't say much. Not to mention, with this chick's figure and elasticity, it was actually quite comfortable to be bumped from behind. What? Is there danger again? Hui Yuti muttered. Anyway, as long as she looked at Lin Yi's back along the way, she couldn't help but be distracted. She was already used to this kind of thing. In front of Lin Yi, her demeanor as a nascent soul stage master had long been thrown away. She didn't have any self-awareness at all. It's not dangerous, but you have to wait for me here for a while. I have a friend who seems to be in some trouble. Lin Yi frowned slightly. Your friend? Hui Yuti was stunned when she heard this. She quickly spread out her divine sense to sense around. Only then did she find that there seemed to be a conflict between a few people in the distance. Among them were Lin Yi's friends? It wasn't too far away from where the two of them were, probably less than 2,000 feet away. At this moment, in a corner of a canyon, 3 men were surrounding a man and a woman. All of them had lewd and sinister smiles on their faces. I'll say it again. Leave the treasures and this chick, then I can spare your life. If you don't know what's good for you, One of the men standing on the side of the 3 laughed incomparably lewdly. At the same time, the other 2 also laughed proudly. The 3 of them surrounded the man and woman from the left, center, and right. Behind them was the canyon cliff. Unless the man and woman could grow wings and fly, it would be a fool's dream to escape. Don't even think about it. This was the resolute voice of a man. He spread out his arms and tightly protected the woman behind him. Facing the 3 men, he said fearlessly, "Even if I, Qi Wenhan, die, I will not let you touch a single hair on my body." From afar, Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh when he heard this voice. This was really Qi Wenhan's personality. As the young master of the Heavens' equal escort agency, he didn't have the air of a spoiled brat. Instead, He was as resolute and courageous as a Jianghu hero. He had the temperament of a chivalrous hero. Since it was Qi Wenhan and Xia Luoluo who were in trouble, Lin Yi originally wanted to rush over to help them. However, after hearing the words of these people, his footsteps immediately slowed down. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.